The Dreadnought stands as one of humanity's most enduring military technologies, its origins reaching back through 10,000 years of warfare to the earliest days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor of Mankind first unleashed his legions of transhuman warriors upon the galaxy. The Space Marines represented the pinnacle of biological engineering, but even these perfect soldiers could fall in battle. The loss of a veteran warrior, particularly one who had accumulated decades or even centuries of combat experience, represented not merely a tactical setback, but the extinction of irreplaceable knowledge. It was this problem that the Dreadnought was designed to solve. The technology itself predates the Imperium by millennia. During humanity's dark age of technology, when mankind spread across the stars in a golden age of scientific achievement, automated construction systems known as standard template constructs contained blueprints for countless devices necessary for human colonization and survival. Among these templates were designs for armored exoskeletons and life support systems far beyond anything that would be independently developed in later ages. When the Age of Strife shattered human civilization and plunged the galaxy into old night, most of this knowledge was lost. The Mechanicum of Mars, however, had preserved fragments of this ancient wisdom, and when the Emperor arrived on the Red Planet to forge his alliance with the Tech Priests, these SDC patterns became available to his expanding armies. The earliest Dreadnoughts constructed during the Unification Wars and the initial phases of the Great Crusade were crude by later standards, cobbled together from incomplete SDC data and the limited manufacturing capabilities of a Terra still recovering from millennia of techno-barbarian warfare. These first walking sarcophagi were little more than armored boxes mounted on mechanical legs, their weapons hard-wired into the systems with minimal sophistication. The Space Marine entombed within existed in a state of constant agony, his ruined body kept alive by a tangle of cables and chemical injectors, while his mind interfaced directly with the machine through crude neural ports drilled into his skull. As the Great Crusade progressed and Forge worlds fell under Imperial control, the technology improved dramatically. The Mechanicum's most skilled artisans refined the life support systems, developed more sophisticated neural interface technologies, and created the standardized patterns that would become familiar across all Space Marine legions. The Castroferum pattern, which would later be known as the Mark IV and Mark V variants, emerged as the most common design, its distinctive sarcophagus-fronted chassis becoming synonymous with Dreadnought warfare. The Contemptor pattern, more sophisticated and incorporating technologies that would be lost during the Horus Heresy, represented the peak of Great Crusade-era Dreadnought construction, with adamantic arc reactors providing power and more advanced gyroscopic stabilization systems allowing for greater mobility. The decision to entomb a Space Marine within a Dreadnought chassis has never been made lightly. When a battle brother falls with wounds too severe for even the advanced medicine of the apothecarian to heal, his fate hangs in the balance. Most mortally wounded Space Marines simply die, their gene seed harvested for implantation in new recruits. Only a select few are deemed worthy of the honor and burden of Dreadnought internment. The criteria vary between chapters, but certain factors remain consistent. The warrior must have demonstrated exceptional valor and accumulated significant combat experience. A newly elevated battle brother, regardless of how grievously wounded, will almost never be considered for entombment. The chapter's leadership evaluates whether the warrior's knowledge and capabilities justify the enormous resources required to construct and maintain a Dreadnought chassis. Veterans of centuries of warfare, company captains who have led their brothers through countless campaigns, and specialists whose expertise cannot be easily replaced represent the most common candidates. The warrior's mental state also factors heavily into the decision. Dreadnought internment requires a strength of will that not all Space Marines possess. The psychological strain of existence within the sarcophagus has driven lesser warriors into madness, their Dreadnought chassis becoming berserker engines that must be destroyed by their own brothers. The chapter's chaplains and librarians assess whether the candidate possesses the mental fortitude to endure what awaits him. The actual process of entombment represents a moment of profound significance within any Space Marine chapter. The dying warrior is transported to the chapter's forge, where the Tech Marines maintain the sacred war machines. What remains of his body is surgically prepared, with limbs amputated and organs removed or relocated to fit within the cramped confines of the sarcophagus. Neural interface plugs are installed directly into his brain and spinal column, creating the connections through which he will perceive and control his new body. Life support systems are grafted onto his cardiovascular and respiratory systems, replacing his failing biological functions with mechanical alternatives. The process is agonizing, conducted with the warrior fully conscious so that his will can be tested one final time. Once sealed within the armored sarcophagus, the Space Marine ceases to exist as he once was. His sensory input now comes entirely through the Dreadnought systems. He sees through optical sensors that process light differently than human eyes. He hears through audio receptors that filter sound through mechanical processors. His sense of touch comes from pressure sensors distributed across the chassis' hull. The disorientation is total and absolute. Many newly entombed warriors experience a period of adjustment during which they struggle to accept their new existence, raging against the machine that has become their prison and their body. The Dreadnought serves multiple purposes within a Space Marine chapter's order of battle. Most obviously, it preserves warriors who would otherwise be lost. A battle brother entombed within a Dreadnought chassis can continue fighting for thousands of years, his accumulated experience and tactical wisdom available to guide younger generations. Dreadnoughts who fought during the Great Crusade still serve in the 41st millennium, their memories stretching back to an age when the Emperor walked among his sons, and the Imperium seemed destined to unite the entire galaxy. These ancient warriors remember battles on worlds whose names have been forgotten, wars against alien empires that no longer exist, and the faces of brothers who have been dust for millennia. Beyond their martial capabilities, Dreadnoughts serve as living repositories of chapter history and tradition. In the 41st millennium, when much of humanity's past has been lost or deliberately obscured, these entombed warriors represent direct connections to ages long past. They remember the truth of events that have become legend, can recite the actual words of long-dead heroes, and maintain traditions that might otherwise have been forgotten. Young Space Marines learn from these ancient veterans, absorbing not just tactical instruction, but the cultural memory of their chapter. The psychological reality of Dreadnought existence, however, is far darker than the honored status might suggest. Between battles, Dreadnoughts are placed into suspended animation, their consciousness shut down to prevent the madness that comes from existing as a disembodied mind trapped in an armored shell. A Dreadnought might fight for a few hours or days, then spend decades or even centuries in dreamless sleep before being awakened again. This cycle of brief waking periods separated by long stretches of unconsciousness creates a fractured experience of time. The Dreadnought awakens to find that brothers he knew have aged and died, that the chapter's organization has changed, that wars he fought in have become ancient history. With each awakening, the entombed warrior finds it harder to remember what it felt like to be human. The sensation of walking on two legs, the taste of food, the warmth of another person's touch, all these fade into distant memories that seem increasingly unreal. The Dreadnought begins to think in terms of firing solutions and armor penetration values. His dreams, when he has them, are filled with targeting reticules and ammunition counters. The machine does not consume the man through any malevolent intent, but simply through the relentless logic of existence. When your body is a walking tank, when your hands are weapons, when your skin is ceramite armor, the memories of flesh become increasingly abstract. The oldest Dreadnoughts, those who have served for 5,000 years or more, often display signs of this gradual dehumanization. They speak in clipped, formal language, their conversations focused entirely on tactical and strategic matters. They struggle to relate to their battle brothers as individuals rather than as tactical assets. Some become fixated on particular enemies or battles, their damaged memories looping endlessly through the same events. Others grow increasingly silent, speaking only when directly addressed and offering responses of minimal length. The chapter's chaplains work to maintain the humanity of these ancient warriors, engaging them in conversation during their brief periods of wakefulness, reminding them of their past and their purpose, but it is a battle they can never truly win. The construction of a Dreadnought chassis represents one of the most complex manufacturing processes still reliably performed in the 41st millennium. Each component must be fabricated to tolerances that push the limits of even mechanicum-forged temples, and the assembly requires tech priests who have spent decades mastering the rituals and procedures passed down through countless generations. The core of any Dreadnought is its hull, constructed from layers of adamantium-reinforced ceramite that provides protection equivalent to the armor worn by main battle tanks. This hull is not a simple shell, but a sophisticated structure with multiple redundant layers, each designed to ablate or deflect different types of weapons fire. As weapons scatter across the outer ceramite coating, their energy dissipated before reaching critical systems. Solid projectiles impact the adamantium framework beneath, their kinetic energy distributed across structural supports. Plasma and melta weapons, the most dangerous threats to any armored vehicle, burn through outer layers but must penetrate multiple barriers before reaching the sarcophagus at the chassis' heart. The sarcophagus itself occupies the central position in most Dreadnought patterns, positioned where a human pilot would sit in a conventional vehicle. This armored capsule contains the amniotic suspension system that keeps the entombed space marine alive. The warrior floats in a thick, nutrient-rich fluid that serves multiple functions. It provides the chemical sustenance his reduced body requires, delivers medications and stimulants directly through his skin, and acts as a shock absorption medium to protect his fragile organic components from the violent movements and impacts the Dreadnought experiences in combat. The fluid is constantly filtered and recycled through a complex system of pumps and processors, its chemical composition adjusted in real time based on the warrior's metabolic needs and stress levels. The Mind Impulse Unit represents the most critical and least understood component of Dreadnought technology. This neural interface system creates a direct connection between the Space Marine's brain and the chassis' machine spirit, allowing thought to translate directly into action. The MIU consists of multiple components, receptor plugs surgically implanted into the warrior's cerebral cortex, neural processors that interpret and filter his mental commands, and distribution systems that relay these commands to the appropriate mechanical systems. The technology derives from Dark Age of technology principles that the mechanicum can replicate but no longer fully comprehends. Tech priests follow precise rituals when installing and calibrating an MIU. They're procedures based on STC data that provides instructions without explaining the underlying mechanisms. The quality of the neural interface determines how effectively the entombed warrior can control his new body. A properly calibrated MIU allows the Dreadnought to move with surprising fluidity, its massive limbs responding to thought as naturally as the Space Marine's original body once did. Poorly maintained or damaged MIU systems create lag between intention and action, forcing the warrior to consciously think through movements that should be instinctive. The oldest Dreadnoughts often struggle with degraded neural interfaces, their movements becoming increasingly stiff and mechanical as the connection between mind and machine deteriorates over centuries of use. Power for the entire system comes from an adamantic arc reactor, a miniaturized fusion plant that generates enormous amounts of energy from a relatively small fuel supply. These reactors represent technology that the Imperium can barely maintain, let alone improve. Each arc reactor is a precious relic, often older than the chapter that uses it, passed from one Dreadnought chassis to another as warriors fall and new candidates require entombment. The reactor's containment systems and fuel processing mechanisms require constant attention from the chapter's most skilled tech marines. A reactor failure during combat means immediate death for the entombed warrior and often results in a catastrophic explosion that can devastate everything within a dozen meters. The Castroferum pattern Dreadnought, designated as Mark IV and Mark V variants depending on specific subsystem configurations, has served as the standard pattern across Space Marine chapters for over 5,000 years. Its distinctive profile, with the sarcophagus mounted prominently on the front of the chassis between two weapon arms, makes it instantly recognizable on any battlefield. The design prioritizes reliability and ease of maintenance over sophistication. Its components are modular, allowing damaged systems to be replaced rather than repaired. The weapon mounts accept a wide variety of armaments, from close combat power fists to long-range lascannons, giving battlefield commanders flexibility in how they deploy their dreadnoughts. The Mark IV variant incorporates slightly more advanced targeting systems and improved gyroscopic stabilizers, making it marginally more accurate and stable during movement. The Mark V represents a simplified design, easier to manufacture, but lacking some of the refinements of its predecessor. In practical terms, the differences between the two are minimal. Both patterns stand approximately 4 meters tall, weigh several tons, and can carry enough ammunition and fuel to operate independently for extended periods. The Castraferum's main limitation is its relatively slow movement speed. The chassis' legs, while strong enough to support its weight and stable enough to provide a firing platform, cannot match the mobility of lighter vehicles or even power-armored space marines. The Contemptor pattern Dreadnought represents a technological peak that the Imperium has been unable to replicate since the Horus Heresy. These machines were constructed during the Great Crusade when the Mechanicum still possessed manufacturing capabilities and knowledge that would be lost in the Civil War's devastation. The Contemptor stands taller than a Castraferum, its more sophisticated leg assemblies allowing for greater speed and maneuverability. Its adamantic arc reactor is more efficient and powerful, providing energy for more demanding weapon systems and enhanced armor. The chassis incorporates adamantic shielding technology, energy fields that provide additional protection beyond the physical armor plating. Contemptor dreadnoughts that still function in the 41st millennium are treasured relics, maintained with obsessive care by chapter tech marines who understand that these machines can never be replaced. Many chapters possess only 1 or 2 Contemptor chassis, reserved for the most crucial battles or kept in stasis except during the direst emergencies. The warriors entombed within these ancient machines are often among the oldest members of their chapters, veterans whose service dates back thousands of years. Some Contemptors still bear the heraldry and colors of the original Space Marine legions, their paintwork carefully maintained across millennia as a link to the chapter's founding. The Redemptor pattern represents the Imperium's first successful development of new dreadnought technology in millennia, created specifically to accommodate Primaris Space Marines. These warriors, larger and more heavily augmented than their firstborn brothers, require correspondingly larger chassis. The Redemptor stands significantly taller than a Castraferum, its increased size allowing it to carry heavier weapons and thicker armor. The design incorporates technologies recovered from Archmagos Belisarius Call's hidden forge complexes, including more efficient power distribution systems and improved neural interface protocols. The Redemptor's increased capabilities come with a significant drawback. The chassis places enormous strain on the entombed warrior's body and mind. The neural load required to control the larger, more complex machine burns through the Space Marine's consciousness at an accelerated rate. Where a warrior in a Castraferum might serve for thousands of years, a Redemptor pilot typically survives only a few centuries before the strain kills him. The Primaris chapters that deploy these machines accept this limitation as necessary, viewing the Redemptor as a weapon that trades longevity for immediate combat effectiveness. The Leviathan pattern Dreadnought was designed during the Horus Heresy for siege warfare and the destruction of hardened fortifications. These massive machines dwarf even Contemptors, mounting weapons typically found on battle tanks rather than infantry support vehicles. Leviathan dreadnoughts carry storm cannons that fire hundreds of mass reactive shells per minute, grav flux bombards that can tear apart armored bunkers, and close combat drills capable of boring through fortress walls. The chassis' armor is correspondingly thick, proof against all but the heaviest anti-tank weapons. The Leviathan's size and power requirements mean that only the largest forged temples could manufacture them, and production ceased entirely after the heresy. The few that remain operational are maintained by chapters with particularly strong ties to the Mechanicum or access to ancient forge complexes. Operating a Leviathan places even greater strain on the entombed warrior than a Redemptor does. The sheer volume of sensory data and the complexity of the weapon systems push the limits of what a Space Marine's enhanced mind can process. Leviathan pilots often emerge from battle disoriented and confused, requiring extended periods in stasis to recover from the neural overload. Individual chapters have developed specialized Dreadnought variants adapted to their particular combat doctrines and cultural traditions. The Blood Angels and their successor chapters field Furioso Dreadnoughts, modified Castroferum chassis equipped exclusively for close combat. These machines mount paired power fists or blood talons, specialized close combat weapons with multiple blades that can shred through infantry and light vehicles. Furioso Dreadnoughts are piloted by warriors who fell to the Black Rage, the genetic curse that afflicts the sons of Sanguinius. Entombment in a Dreadnought chassis channels their berserk fury into a directed weapon, allowing them to serve their chapter even in madness. Librarian Dreadnoughts represent an unusual combination of psychic power and armored might. These rare machines house Psyker Space Marines whose bodies were destroyed, but whose minds retain their connection to the warp. The chassis incorporates specialized force weapon systems and psychic focusing, arrays that amplify the entombed librarian's powers. The machine's armor provides protection that allows the Psyker to manifest abilities that would leave an unprotected librarian vulnerable to enemy fire. The combination of psychic assault and heavy weapons makes librarian dreadnoughts devastating against enemy commanders and monstrous creatures, though their rarity means most chapters possess at most one or two such machines. The ironclad pattern, used primarily by chapters with strong ties to siege warfare and defensive operations, features enhanced armor plating and specialized equipment for breaching fortifications. These dreadnoughts carry seismic hammers that can shatter reinforced walls, chain fists for cutting through armored doors, and additional armor plates that make them nearly impervious to small arms fire. Ironclads move more slowly than standard Castroferum dreadnoughts due to their increased weight, but their durability allows them to advance through fire that would destroy lighter units. The armament systems mounted on Dreadnought chassis represent some of the most powerful weapons available to Space Marine forces, scaled up from standard infantry weapons to accommodate the massive frame and power generation capabilities of the walking sarcophagus. The Dreadnought Close Combat Weapon, universally abbreviated as DCCW, serves as the standard melee armament across all patterns. This massive power fist extends from the Dreadnought's arm mount, its ceramite-sheathed fingers capable of crushing battle tank armor or tearing through reinforced bunker walls. The weapon incorporates a power field generator that disrupts molecular bonds on contact, allowing the Dreadnought to literally pulp armored targets with its grip. Most DCCW configurations integrate a storm bolter into the weapon housing, mounted above or below the fist assembly. This allows the Dreadnought to maintain suppressive fire even while closing to melee range. The storm bolter's twin barrels cycling through hundreds of mass reactive rounds to clear infantry from defensive positions before the power fist crushes whatever hardened target remains. The power fist variant lacks the disruption field of a full DCCW, but compensates with a more robust physical structure and enhanced gripping mechanisms. Tech priests favor this configuration when the Dreadnought will operate in environments where the power field generator might be compromised by environmental conditions, or when ammunition conservation makes the integrated storm bolter less practical. The chain fist represents a specialized evolution of the power fist, replacing the standard fingers with a massive chain blade assembly mounted across the weapon's striking surface. The chain blade's adamantium teeth, each the size of a combat knife, rotate at tremendous speeds, allowing the chain fist to saw through materials that might resist a standard power fist's crushing grip. Chapters that frequently engage in boarding actions or urban warfare favor chain fists for their ability to cut through bulkheads and reinforced walls, creating breaches through which assault squads can pour into enemy positions. Seismic hammers and thunder hammers represent the apex of Dreadnought close combat weaponry, though their weight and power requirements limit their deployment to specific patterns and tactical situations. The seismic hammer generates localized seismic shockwaves on impact, the weapon's head containing a gravity pulse generator that creates a brief but intense gravitational distortion. When the hammer strikes a target, the shockwave propagates through the material, shattering molecular bonds and causing catastrophic structural failure. A seismic hammer impact against a fortification wall doesn't just breach the surface, but causes entire sections to collapse as the shockwave radiates through the structure. Against armored vehicles, the weapon can crack engine blocks and rupture fuel tanks even through intact armor plating, the shockwave bypassing the protective shell to destroy the vulnerable components within. Thunder hammers operate on similar principles, but focus their energy more narrowly, creating a devastating electrical discharge at the moment of impact. The weapon's head contains a power field generator significantly more powerful than those found in standard power weapons, fed directly from the Dreadnought's arc reactor. The electrical discharge that accompanies each strike can overload electronic systems, disable power armor, and cause secondary explosions in vehicles by igniting fuel or ammunition. The Thunder Hammer's primary drawback is its slow striking speed. The weapon's massive weight and the need to properly charge the power field between strikes means the Dreadnought must time its attacks carefully, making the Thunder Hammer less effective against multiple fast-moving targets, but devastating against single hardened objectives. Ranged armament configurations vary enormously depending on the chapter's tactical doctrine, the specific mission parameters, and the available weapons in the chapter's armory. The assault cannon serves as perhaps the most common primary ranged weapon, a 6-barreled rotary autocannon that fires mass reactive shells at a rate of several hundred rounds per minute. The weapon's sustained fire can shred light vehicles, suppress infantry formations, and provide area denial against enemy advances. The assault cannon's ammunition feed draws from a large hopper mounted on the Dreadnought's chassis, typically carrying several thousand rounds. The weapon's main limitation is its relatively short effective range compared to other heavy weapons, requiring the Dreadnought to advance within a few hundred meters of its target to achieve maximum effectiveness. Twin-linked lascannons provide long-range anti-armor capability, each barrel firing a focused beam of laser energy capable of punching through the heaviest armor plating. The twin-linked configuration, with 2 lascannon barrels mounted in parallel, ensures that if one weapon experiences a misfire or power fluctuation, the second can maintain fire. The lascannons draw enormous amounts of energy from the Dreadnought's reactor, limiting their sustained fire rate but providing devastating single-shot stopping power. A well-placed lascannon shot can disable a battle tank with a single hit, the beam boring through armor to detonate ammunition stores or vaporize crew compartments. Chapters that expect to face heavy armor or monstrous creatures favor lascannon configurations, accepting the weapon's slower rate of fire in exchange for guaranteed penetration against hardened targets. Missile launchers offer tactical flexibility through their ability to fire different ammunition types depending on the situation. The standard configuration carries a mix of frag missiles for anti-personnel work and crack missiles for armor penetration. The launcher system typically holds 6 to 8 missiles in a vertical magazine, with an automated loading mechanism that can swap between ammunition types in seconds. Frag missiles explode in a shower of shrapnel that can clear infantry from defensive positions or suppress enemy advances across open ground. Crack missiles use shaped charge warheads to penetrate armor, their focused explosive force capable of crippling vehicles or collapsing fortified structures. Some missile launchers can also fire flak missiles equipped with proximity fuses for engaging aircraft or jump pack-equipped infantry, though these specialized munitions are less common in standard loadouts. Plasma cannons represent some of the most dangerous weapons a Dreadnought can carry, both to its enemies and potentially to itself. These weapons generate and contain a sphere of superheated plasma, then use magnetic acceleration to launch the plasma bolt toward the target. On impact, the plasma burns through virtually any material, vaporizing infantry and melting through armor plate with equal ease. The plasma cannon's main drawback is its tendency to overheat, the containment system sometimes failing to properly vent the enormous thermal energy generated during firing. An overheating plasma cannon can catastrophically fail, the uncontained plasma explosion consuming the weapon and potentially damaging the Dreadnought itself. Tech priests maintain plasma weapons with obsessive care, performing ritual cooling procedures and reciting litanies of thermal regulation, but even the most carefully maintained plasma cannon carries an element of risk with every shot. Multi-meltas deliver short-range but absolutely devastating thermal energy, using focused microwave radiation to superheat and vaporize targets. The weapon is essentially a scaled-up version of the meltagun carried by infantry, its larger size and direct connection to the Dreadnought's power supply allowing it to generate significantly more powerful beams. A multi-melta can cut through the heaviest armor at close range, melting through tank glacis plates or fortress walls in seconds. The weapon's extremely short effective range, typically less than 100 meters, limits its tactical applications. Dreadnoughts equipped with multi-meltas must close to near point-blank range to employ their weapons effectively, exposing themselves to concentrated enemy fire during the approach. Chapters that favor aggressive, close-quarters tactics often pair multi-meltas with close combat weapons, creating Dreadnoughts optimized for breaching enemy strongpoints and destroying hardened targets at close range. Heavy flamers provide area denial and anti-infantry capabilities, projecting streams of burning promethium that can clear trenches, bunkers, and urban terrain of enemy infantry. The heavy flamers' fuel tanks, mounted on the Dreadnought's chassis, carry enough promethium for sustained fire, allowing the weapon to maintain continuous streams of flame that can deny entire sections of battlefield to enemy forces. The psychological impact of heavy flamer attacks often exceeds their direct casualties, as few soldiers will hold positions while burning promethium washes over their defenses. The weapon proves particularly effective in boarding actions and urban warfare, where enemies often cluster in confined spaces that amplify the flamer's effectiveness. Specialized weapon systems exist in limited numbers, often unique to specific chapters or recovered from ancient armories. The graviton gun, a relic of Dark Age technology, generates localized gravitational anomalies that can crush vehicles, collapse structures, or even create brief singularities that pull enemies into a central point before releasing them in a shower of debris. These weapons are exceedingly rare, their mechanisms barely understood by even the most learned tech priests. The few graviton guns still in service are treated as holy relics, deployed only in the most critical battles, and maintained through ritual procedures passed down through generations of tech marines. Conversion beamers represent another fragment of lost technology, weapons that fire a focused beam of energy that grows more powerful with distance. Unlike conventional weapons that lose effectiveness at range, a conversion beamer becomes more dangerous the farther its target. The beam converts matter directly into energy along its path, accumulating power as it travels until it strikes with devastating force. The weapon's unusual characteristics make it difficult to employ effectively, requiring careful positioning and clear firing lanes, but in the hands of a skilled Dreadnought pilot, a conversion beamer can eliminate targets at ranges that conventional weapons cannot match. Archaeotech weaponry preserved from the Horus Heresy era includes Volkite chargers, weapons that fire beams of thermal energy that cause targets to explosively deflagrate. These weapons were common during the Great Crusade, but the technology to manufacture them was lost during the heresy. The few Volkite weapons still in service are irreplaceable relics, their internal mechanisms maintained through procedures that border on archaeology rather than engineering. Plasma blast guns, oversized plasma weapons with even greater destructive potential than standard plasma cannons, exist in the armories of some first founding chapters, though their extreme rarity and the dangers inherent in their operation mean they see combat only in the most desperate circumstances. Defensive systems on Dreadnought chassis begin with the armor plating itself, multiple layers of ceramite and adamantium that can withstand punishment that would vaporize unarmored infantry. The armor's thickness varies by pattern, with ironclad Dreadnoughts carrying additional plates that make them nearly immune to anything short of dedicated anti-tank weapons. The armor is not simply passive protection, but incorporates ablative layers designed to shed energy from directed energy weapons and space sections, that cause kinetic penetrators to tumble and lose effectiveness before reaching critical systems. Adamantic shielding, found on contemptor patterns and some other ancient chassis, generates an energy field around the Dreadnought that provides additional protection beyond the physical armor. These shields can absorb or deflect incoming fire, their energy fields disrupting the molecular structure of projectiles or dispersing laser beams before they reach the hull. The shields draw power from the adamantic arc reactor, their effectiveness fluctuating based on available energy and the intensity of incoming fire. Sustained bombardment can overload the shields, forcing them offline until the reactor can regenerate sufficient power. The technology to manufacture new adamantic shield generators has been lost, making these systems another irreplaceable component that Techmarines maintain with extreme care. Smoke launchers provide tactical concealment, firing canisters that burst into clouds of obscuring particles. The smoke disrupts targeting systems, blocks line of sight, and can mask the Dreadnought's approach or cover its withdrawal from untenable positions. Most Dreadnoughts carry multiple launcher banks, allowing them to generate smoke screens repeatedly during extended engagements. The smoke composition varies, with some chapters using standard obscurants, while others employ specialized mixtures that also disrupt auspex scans or thermal imaging. Searchlights mounted on the chassis allow Dreadnoughts to operate effectively in low-light conditions, their powerful beams illuminating targets for both the Dreadnought's own weapons and supporting units. The searchlights can be fitted with different filters to provide infrared illumination, invisible to normal vision, but visible to the Dreadnought's sensors, or ultraviolet light that causes certain materials to fluoresce. In night fighting or operations in enclosed spaces, these searchlights transform the Dreadnought into a mobile firebase that can coordinate fire from multiple units by illuminating priority targets. The combination of heavy armor, sophisticated defensive systems, and overwhelming firepower makes Dreadnoughts nearly impervious to the small arms fire that threatens standard infantry. Lasgun shots scatter harmlessly off the ceramite hull. Bolter rounds that would kill Space Marines in power armor merely scar the Dreadnought's plating, and even heavy stubbers and autocannons struggle to penetrate the layered defenses. This resilience allows Dreadnoughts to advance through fire that would pin down or destroy other units, their armored bulk shrugging off attacks while their weapons systematically eliminate threats. The process of rousing a Dreadnought from stasis begins hours before the actual awakening, as Techmarines and servitors perform preliminary checks on the chassis systems. The Dreadnought rests in its alcove within the chapter's reclusiam, or a dedicated chamber of the Fortress Monastery's forge, connected to power feeds and monitoring systems that have maintained its suspended animation for however long since its last deployment. The duration varies enormously. Some Dreadnoughts are awakened every few decades for battles their chapter deems worthy of their presence. Others sleep for centuries between activations, their consciousness suspended in a timeless void where dreams cannot form and thoughts do not occur. The monitoring systems display the status of hundreds of subsystems, each gauge and readout representing some aspect of the machine's health and the biological condition of the warrior within. The Techmarines approach the awakening with a mixture of technical precision and religious reverence. They are, after all, dealing with both a sacred war machine and an honored brother whose service to the chapter predates their own existence by centuries or millennia. The lead Techmarine, typically one who has specialized in Dreadnought maintenance and accumulated decades of experience with these particular rites, begins with the litany of activation. This prayer formula serves both spiritual and practical purposes. The words themselves, passed down through generations of Techmarines since the founding of the chapter, contain encoded instructions for the proper sequence of system initialization. Each verse corresponds to specific technical procedures, engaging the primary power feeds, initializing the sarcophagus life support systems, warming the neural interface processors, and gradually bringing the machine's spirit from dormancy to active status. The litany of activation is not simply recited, but must be performed with precise timing. The Techmarine speaks each verse while simultaneously performing the corresponding technical operation, his hands moving across control panels and manual overrides in patterns that have become muscle memory through countless repetitions. The timing matters because the Dreadnought systems must be brought online in a specific sequence. Activating the neural interface before the sarcophagus systems have stabilized could cause the warrior to awaken into a body that cannot properly respond to his commands, potentially causing panic or disorientation. Engaging the weapon systems before the targeting cogitators have completed their initialization sequences could result in misfires or friendly fire incidents. The machine spirit of a dreadnought is a complex entity, distinct from both the warrior entombed within and the simple autonomous functions found in less sophisticated machines. It represents the accumulated personality of the chassis itself, developed over centuries of operation and influenced by every warrior who has been interred within it. Some dreadnoughts house their original occupant, the first space marine sealed within the sarcophagus when the chassis was newly constructed. Others have contained multiple warriors over their operational lifespan, each adding his own character to the machine spirit's development. The machine spirit must be properly appeased and prepared for activation, its cooperation essential for the dreadnought to function at full efficiency. The canticle of the machine spirit is a separate prayer cycle performed simultaneously with the litany of activation, typically recited by junior tech marines or specially trained servitors, while the lead tech marine focuses on the technical procedures. This canticle addresses the machine spirit directly, acknowledging its service, requesting its cooperation, and preparing it for the violence of combat. The words vary between chapters, each having developed their own variations over millennia, but the core elements remain consistent. The canticle reminds the machine's spirit of its purpose, invokes the blessings of the Omnissiah upon its systems, and promises proper maintenance and sacred unguents as rewards for faithful service. While the Tech Marines handle the mechanical aspects of awakening, the chapter's chaplains prepare to address the spiritual and psychological needs of the warrior within. A chaplain, often one who knew the entombed space marine before his internment, or who has studied the warrior's history extensively, stations himself before the Dreadnaught's sarcophagus. The chaplain's role in the awakening is to provide continuity and context, to help the warrior orient himself in time and space after what might have been centuries of unconsciousness. The chaplain carries data slates containing information about the current situation, what year it is, what enemies threaten the chapter, what battle the dreadnought is being awakened to fight, and which brothers still live who might remember him from his previous activation. The actual moment of consciousness returning to the entombed warrior is not instantaneous but gradual. The neural interface begins transmitting sensory data in carefully modulated stages. First come the most basic inputs, pressure sensors indicating the warrior still exists in physical space, temperature readings, the hum of the reactor cycling up to active status. These sensations provide grounding, preventing the complete disorientation that would result from instant full sensory activation. The warrior's consciousness rises from the void of suspended animation like a diver ascending from deep water, awareness returning in stages as his mind reconnects with the machine that has become his body. Audio inputs activate next, allowing the warrior to hear the voices of the Tech Marines and chaplain, their familiar litanies and prayers providing reassurance that he is among brothers rather than in enemy hands. The fear of awakening as a captured trophy, imprisoned in his own chassis while enemies study or torture him, haunts many dreadnoughts. The sound of proper Mechanicum cant and chapter prayers immediately establishes that this is a normal awakening rather than a nightmare scenario. Visual sensors come online last, their activation timed to coincide with the warrior's full consciousness. The first thing he sees is typically the chaplain's skull-faced helmet, or the Tech Marine's servo arms working across his chassis, familiar sights that anchor him in the present. The disorientation that accompanies awakening cannot be entirely eliminated regardless of how carefully the procedures are performed. The entombed warrior must reconcile his last memories with his current situation, a process complicated by the temporal discontinuity of his existence. He remembers fighting in a battle that might have occurred decades or centuries ago, then darkness, and now he is awake again in what feels like moments later, but is actually a vast span of time. The chaplain's first words address this directly, stating clearly how long the warrior has slept and providing immediate context. The information is delivered without embellishment or unnecessary detail, just the essential facts needed for orientation. The psychological preparation required for Ray engagement varies depending on how long the Dreadnought has slept and what has changed during that period. A warrior awakened after only a few decades might find his chapter largely unchanged, with many brothers he knew still alive and serving. The adjustment in such cases is relatively straightforward, requiring only a briefing on current tactical situations and any organizational changes that have occurred. A Dreadnought roused after centuries of sleep faces a far more difficult transition. The chapter he remembers might have changed dramatically. Brothers he fought alongside are long dead, their gene seed passed to new recruits who have themselves lived full lives and died. The chapter's organization might have shifted, with new companies formed or old ones reorganized. The enemies he last fought might have been defeated or driven from Imperial space, replaced by new threats he has never encountered. The chaplain's role extends beyond simple information delivery. He must help the warrior process the reality of his situation, acknowledge the losses he has experienced, and redirect his focus toward the present crisis. Some Dreadnoughts struggle with this transition, their minds fixating on the past rather than accepting the present. They ask repeatedly about brothers who died centuries ago, or insist on tactical dispositions that no longer exist, or refuse to accept that wars they fought in have long since concluded. The chaplain must be firm in such cases, using his authority and the warrior's own sense of duty to pull him back to the present. The chapter needs this Dreadnought now, for the battle that is about to be fought, and dwelling on the unchangeable past serves no purpose. The mental strain of Ray engagement manifests differently in different warriors. Younger Dreadnoughts, those who have been entombed for only a few centuries, typically adjust quickly once the initial disorientation passes. Their human memories remain relatively intact, and their sense of self has not yet been completely subsumed by the machine. Ancient Dreadnoughts, veterans of 5,000 years or more, often display more concerning symptoms. They might confuse current battles with ancient ones, addressing chaplains by the names of brothers dead for millennia, or insisting they are fighting enemies that no longer exist. The chaplain must navigate these confusions carefully, neither indulging the delusion nor dismissing it too harshly. The goal is to bring the warrior's focus to the present without damaging his fragile mental state. The Reclusium maintains detailed records of every Dreadnought's psychological state, notes compiled over centuries documenting the warrior's responses to awakening, his mental stability during combat, and any concerning developments in his consciousness. These records guide the chaplains in their approach to each individual. A Dreadnought known to become aggressive and difficult to control requires a different handling than one who tends toward depression and reluctance to engage. The chaplain assigned to each awakening has studied these records extensively, preparing himself for the specific challenges this particular warrior presents. The apothecarian's involvement in the awakening process focuses on the biological health of the entombed space marine. An apothecary monitors the life support systems as they transition from dormant to active status, watching for any signs of degradation in the warrior's physical condition. The amniotic fluid is sampled and analyzed, its chemical composition checked against baseline values established during previous awakenings. Changes in the fluid's composition can indicate problems with the warrior's metabolism, infections in his remaining organic systems, or degradation of the life support equipment itself. The apothecary checks the neural interface connections, examining the implant sites for signs of rejection or infection. After centuries of continuous connection between flesh and machine, these interface points represent potential failure locations, where the warrior's immune system might finally reject the foreign components, or where infections might establish themselves despite the Space Marine's enhanced resistance to disease. Biological degradation represents an inevitable reality for all Dreadnoughts. The human body, even one as extensively modified as a Space Marine's, was not designed for the existence imposed by Dreadnought internment. the warrior's remaining organs function in an artificial environment, sustained by machines and chemicals rather than natural biological processes. Over time, systems begin to fail. Kidneys struggle to process the artificial nutrients provided through the amniotic fluid. The heart, no longer pumping blood through limbs and extremities, can develop arrhythmias or structural weaknesses. The lungs, breathing recycled air through mechanical assistance, may develop scarring or reduced capacity. The apothecarian monitors these degenerative processes closely, intervening when possible to slow or reverse the damage, but ultimately fighting a battle they cannot win. The prevention of madness requires constant vigilance from both the reclusiam and the apothecarian. The psychological stresses of dreadnought existence would break a normal human immediately, and even space marines, with their enhanced mental conditioning and psychological resilience, can succumb over time. The isolation of suspended animation, the disorientation of awakening to find centuries have passed, the gradual loss of human sensation and memory, all of these factors accumulate to create enormous psychological pressure. The chaplains work to maintain the warrior's sense of identity and purpose through regular interaction during his waking periods, reminding him of his achievements, his importance to the chapter, and the honor he brings through his continued service. Some chapters have developed specialized techniques for maintaining the sanity of their most ancient dreadnoughts. The Blood Angels and their successors allow their dreadnoughts to participate in the chapter's artistic traditions during brief periods of wakefulness, their massive power fists wielding specially designed tools to create sculptures or paintings. The Space Wolves engage their dreadnoughts in the telling of sagas, encouraging them to share memories of battles fought millennia ago, preserving oral traditions that might otherwise be lost. The Ultramarines maintain extensive libraries that their dreadnoughts can access through data feeds, allowing the entombed warriors to continue their study of the Codex Astartes and military history, even while sealed in their sarcophagi. The maintenance rituals performed on dreadnought chassis between battles represent some of the most elaborate technical procedures in any Space Marine chapter's traditions. These rituals begin immediately after a dreadnought returns from combat, while the chassis is still warm and the warrior within is still conscious. The Tech Marines inspect every system, cataloging damage, checking for stress fractures in the armor plating, examining weapon systems for signs of overheating or mechanical failure, and testing the integrity of the sarcophagus seals. This initial inspection determines what repairs are necessary and how urgently they must be performed. The sacred unguents applied to the dreadnought chassis serve both practical and spiritual purposes. These oils and balms, manufactured according to ancient mechanicum formulas, contain anti-corrosive compounds that protect the metal components from degradation, lubricants that keep joints and servos operating smoothly, and sealants that maintain the integrity of gaskets and seals. The application of these unguents is accompanied by prayers and benedictions, the Tech Marines treating each component as a sacred relic deserving of reverence. The adamantium framework receives anointing with oils blessed by the chapter's master of the forge. The weapon systems are consecrated with unguents specific to their function, different formulas for energy weapons versus projectile systems versus close combat implements. The dreadnought chassis is treated as both a revered artifact and a living shrine to the chapter's history. Many dreadnoughts carry battle honors and decorations accumulated over millennia of service, their hull plating covered in purity seals, oath papers, and honorific inscriptions. These decorations are maintained with the same care as the mechanical systems, each seal checked for integrity, each inscription ray etched when time begins to fade it, each honor preserved as a record of the chassis' service. The oldest dreadnoughts become mobile museums, their armor telling the story of the chapter through the campaigns they have fought and the enemies they have destroyed. The physical location where dreadnoughts rest between deployments varies significantly between chapters, but certain architectural and spiritual principles remain consistent across nearly all Space Marine fortresses. Most chapters maintain dedicated chambers known as Halls of Remembrance, though some refer to these spaces as the Chamber of Ancients, the Vault of Heroes, or by chapter-specific titles that reflect their particular cultural traditions. These halls occupy positions of profound importance within the fortress monastery's layout, typically situated near the reclusium or the chapter's primary chapel, emphasizing the spiritual significance of the warriors housed within. The Space Wolves maintain their dreadnoughts in the Fang's deepest levels, in chambers carved from the living rock of Fenris, where the cold helps preserve the ancient machines. The Dark Angels keep their most venerable dreadnoughts in the Tower of Angels aboard the rock, in chambers that have remained unchanged since the Great Crusade, while their successor chapters often replicate this arrangement in their own fortress monasteries. The architectural design of these chambers reflects their dual purpose as both storage facilities and shrines. The alcoves where individual dreadnoughts stand are not simple parking bays, but carefully constructed niches, each one fitted with power connections, monitoring systems, and often elaborate decorative elements that honor the warrior within. The Ultramarines and their successors favor classical architectural styles, with columns and arches framing each alcove, inscriptions in high Gothic detailing the occupants' deeds carved into the stonework. The Blood Angels create alcoves that resemble reliquaries, with gilded frames and artistic flourishes that transform each dreadnought's resting place into a work of art. The Iron Hands take a more austere approach, their dreadnought chambers resembling industrial facilities with exposed power conduits and minimal decoration, though even they maintain detailed technical records and honor rolls for each chassis. The atmosphere within these halls carries a weight that even unaugmented humans can feel. The air itself seems different, charged with a sense of ancient presence and dormant power. The only sounds are typically the low hum of power systems maintaining the dreadnoughts in stasis, the occasional servo skull drifting through on maintenance duties, and the footsteps of whoever has entered the chamber. The lighting is deliberately subdued, often provided by candles or glow globes rather than harsh artificial illumination, creating an environment that encourages contemplation and reverence. Many chapters maintain perpetual vigils in their halls of remembrance, with battle brothers or chapter serfs taking turns standing watch over the sleeping ancients, a duty considered both an honor and a solemn responsibility. The veneration of dreadnoughts as living relics extends far beyond simple respect for veteran warriors. These entombed space marines represent direct connections to the chapter's past in ways that even the oldest active battle brothers cannot match. A chaplain might serve for 300 years and accumulate vast knowledge of chapter traditions, but a dreadnought who fought during the Horus Heresy possesses memories that span 10,000 years. These ancient warriors remember the Imperium as it was during the Great Crusade, when the Emperor still walked among his armies, and the Primarchs led their legions in the conquest of the galaxy. They fought alongside the founding members of their chapters, warriors whose names are now invoked in battle prayers, and whose deeds have become legends. The distinction between history and living memory blurs in the presence of these ancients. Chapter Ancients, as the most venerable dreadnoughts are often titled, serve functions that extend well beyond their martial capabilities. When awake, they act as advisors to the chapter master and his council, their centuries or millennia of experience providing perspective that no amount of study can replicate. A chapter master facing a difficult strategic decision might awaken a particular dreadnought known for tactical brilliance, seeking counsel from a warrior who has witnessed similar situations across centuries of warfare. The ancient's advice carries weight not just because of his experience, but because his judgment is unclouded by the political considerations and personal ambitions that can affect even space marines. The dreadnought has no desire for advancement or glory, no factional allegiances within the chapter's power structure, only a pure focus on what will best serve the chapter's interests. The role of dreadnoughts as historians becomes increasingly important as the Imperium's records degrade, and the truth of past events becomes obscured by time and deliberate obfuscation. The Administratum's archives are notoriously unreliable, filled with contradictory accounts, lost data, and information deliberately falsified for political purposes. A dreadnought who participated in a campaign personally knows what actually happened, unfiltered by the distortions that accumulate through bureaucratic record-keeping. When disputes arise about chapter history, or the proper interpretation of ancient traditions, the testimony of a dreadnought who was present during the events in question settles the matter with an authority that no written record can match. This historical function proves particularly crucial for chapters whose origins trace back to the Horus Heresy or the immediate aftermath. The Dark Angels and their successors maintain dreadnoughts who remember the fall of Caliban, though what these ancients know about the fallen and the circumstances of their Primarch's disappearance remains closely guarded. The Space Wolves possess dreadnoughts who fought at Prospero, their memories of that catastrophic battle providing the chapter's official narrative of events that the Thousand Suns remember very differently. The Imperial Fists keep dreadnoughts who survived the Iron Cage, warriors who can describe firsthand the horror of that siege and the lessons learned through blood and suffering. The relationship between active battle brothers and the venerable ancients follows patterns established over millennia but adapted to each chapter's specific culture. Younger Space Marines, particularly those recently elevated from scout status to full battle brother rank, are encouraged to seek audience with the dreadnoughts during the ancients' brief periods of wakefulness. These interactions serve multiple purposes. The young Marine learns from a warrior whose experience dwarfs his own, absorbing tactical lessons and strategic insights that would take centuries to accumulate through personal experience. The Dreadnought, for his part, maintains connection with the chapter's present, preventing the complete temporal isolation that can accelerate mental degradation. The tradition of seeking counsel from the ancients follows formal protocols in most chapters. A battle brother wishing to speak with a dreadnought must first petition the Reclusiam or the Master of the Forge, depending on which organization maintains authority over the halls of remembrance in that particular chapter. The petition must state the purpose of the requested audience and demonstrate that the matter warrants disturbing the ancients' rest. Frivolous requests are denied, but legitimate questions about tactics, chapter history, or personal dilemmas are generally granted, assuming the relevant dreadnought is not scheduled for imminent deployment or recovering from recent combat. The actual conversations between battle brothers and dreadnoughts can be deeply uncomfortable for the younger Marines. Speaking with a dreadnought means confronting the reality of what they themselves might become if they survive long enough and suffer the right kind of catastrophic injury. The massive armored chassis, the mechanical voice emanating from vox speakers rather than human vocal cords, the knowledge that the warrior they're speaking with has no body beyond what remains in the sarcophagus, all of these factors create an unsettling experience. The Dreadnought's perspective has been fundamentally altered by centuries of existence as a machine. His thought patterns and priorities shifted in ways that can seem alien to Space Marines who still walk on their own legs and grip weapons with their own hands. The transfer of tactical knowledge across millennia represents one of the most valuable functions Dreadnoughts serve. A veteran Dreadnought has fought against enemies that no longer exist, employed tactics against threats that current battle brothers have never encountered, and witnessed the evolution of warfare across centuries. This accumulated experience becomes particularly valuable when the chapter faces unusual or unprecedented situations. The Tyranids' arrival in the galaxy during the late 41st millennium presented threats that no amount of training could prepare Marines for. But some dreadnoughts remembered fighting similarly adaptive biological horrors during the Great Crusade, Xenos species that the Imperium had driven to extinction millennia ago, but whose tactical patterns resembled the Tyranid swarms. The teaching methods employed by dreadnoughts vary according to their individual personalities and the degradation of their human social skills. Some ancients retain the ability to explain concepts clearly, walking younger Marines through tactical scenarios and explaining the reasoning behind specific decisions. Others have lost much of their capacity for nuanced communication, their lessons delivered in terse statements and brief observations that the student must interpret and apply. A particularly ancient dreadnought might respond to a question about fighting orc hordes with a single sentence describing a battle fought 5,000 years ago, leaving the young Marine to extract the relevant tactical principles from the brief anecdote. The psychological impact of these interactions affects both parties. For the battle brother, speaking with a dreadnought provides perspective on his own mortality and the true scope of service to the chapter. He realizes that his individual lifespan, even if he survives for centuries, represents only a brief moment in the chapter's history. The dreadnought he speaks with has seen dozens or hundreds of warriors like him serve and die, each one believing his own struggles and achievements to be of paramount importance, all of them now forgotten except as names in the chapter's rolls of honor. This realization can be humbling or inspiring depending on the individual Marine's character, but it invariably affects how he views his place within the chapter's eternal war. For the dreadnought, these conversations serve as anchors to the present and reminders of what he once was. The young Marine's questions about basic tactics or chapter procedures, matters the ancient has known for centuries, remind him that knowledge is not universal and that his experience has value beyond simple battlefield effectiveness. The interaction with a battle brother who still possesses a human body, who experiences the world through organic senses, provides a connection to sensations and experiences the dreadnought can barely remember. Some ancients treasure these conversations, requesting that particular battle brothers visit them regularly, forming relationships that span the gulf between their radically different forms of existence. The somber ceremonies dedicated to honoring dreadnoughts reflect each chapter's cultural traditions while maintaining certain universal elements. The Day of Remembrance, observed by most chapters though under various names, dedicates specific time to commemorating the entombed heroes. The Ultramarines and their successors typically observe this ceremony on the anniversary of the chapter's founding, gathering in the halls of remembrance for prayers and recitations of the ancients' deeds. The Blood Angels hold their ceremony on the anniversary of Sanguinius's death, linking the sacrifice of their Primarch with the ongoing sacrifice of the Dreadnoughts, who continue serving millennia after their bodies should have failed. The Space Wolves incorporate their Dreadnought honors into their feast traditions, with sagas sung celebrating both the living and the entombed, treating the Dreadnoughts as participants in the feast even though they cannot eat or drink. These ceremonies involve the entire chapter when possible, with all battle brothers not currently deployed gathering in the halls of remembrance or the main chapel. The chapter master leads the observances, often accompanied by the Master of Sanctity and other senior officers. Each dreadnought is acknowledged by name and title, his deeds recited from the chapter's records, his service to the Emperor, and the chapter proclaimed before the assembled brothers. The recitations can take hours when a chapter possesses dozens of dreadnoughts, each one's history spanning centuries or millennia, but the Marines stand in respectful silence throughout, understanding that they honor not just the individuals, but the concept of eternal service that the dreadnoughts embody. Some chapters awaken their dreadnoughts for these ceremonies, allowing the ancients to participate directly rather than sleeping through their own commemoration. This practice carries risks, as awakening a dreadnought solely for ceremonial purposes rather than combat deployment can be disorienting for the warrior within. The ancient awakens expecting battle, his mind prepared for violence, only to find himself in a peaceful gathering of his brothers. The adjustment can be difficult, particularly for dreadnoughts whose mental state has degraded to the point where they struggle to distinguish between different types of situations. Other chapters prefer to let the dreadnoughts sleep during these ceremonies, reasoning that the honors are for the benefit of the living brothers, reminding them of the sacrifice and service the ancients represent. The feast days associated with dreadnought veneration often include ritual elements specific to individual chapters. The salamanders bring newly forged weapons and armor to lay before their dreadnoughts, offerings that acknowledge the ancients' role as the chapter's ultimate warriors. The Imperial Fists conduct ceremonies where battle brothers ritually polish and maintain the dreadnought chassis, performing the basic maintenance tasks themselves rather than leaving everything to tech marines and servitors, physically demonstrating their respect through labor. The Raven Guard observe their dreadnought ceremonies in darkness, with only the faint glow of the stasis fields illuminating the ancients, creating an atmosphere of shadow and memory appropriate to their chapter's character. The spiritual significance of dreadnoughts extends beyond their individual identities to represent broader concepts within chapter theology. They embody the principle of eternal service, the the idea that a space marine's duty to the Emperor and humanity transcends physical death. They demonstrate that even catastrophic injury cannot excuse a warrior from his obligations, that service continues regardless of what form that service must take. They prove that the chapter itself is eternal, that individual warriors may fall, but the institution persists across millennia, maintained through the dedication of each generation to the one that follows. The individual dreadnoughts who have achieved legendary status within the Imperium represent more than simple warriors preserved in mechanical shells. They embody the living history of the Space Marines, their consciousness spanning millennia of warfare and bearing witness to events that have shaped the galaxy. Among these venerable ancients, certain names carry weight that extends beyond their own chapters, their deeds and continued existence becoming part of the broader mythology of the Adeptus Astartes. These warriors have transcended their original identities to become symbols of endurance, loyalty, and the terrible price of eternal service. Bjorn the Fell-Handed stands as the oldest living space marine in the entire Imperium, his consciousness preserved within his dreadnought chassis for over 10,000 years. He fought during the Great Crusade as a warrior of the 6th Legion, the Space Wolves, serving directly under Leman Russ before the Primarch disappeared into the Eye of Terror. Bjorn's memories extend back to the earliest days of the Imperium's expansion, when the Emperor still led his armies and the dream of uniting humanity under one banner seemed achievable. He walked the halls of the Imperial Palace on Terra before the Horus Heresy transformed it into a fortress, spoke with the Emperor himself on multiple occasions, and remembers the Primarch of the Space Wolves not as the mythical figure he has become, but as the living warrior who led them into battle. The circumstances of Bjorn's internment within his dreadnought chassis occurred during the early 31st millennium, in the chaotic centuries following the heresy's conclusion. The exact details of the battle where he received his mortal wounds have been lost or obscured by time, though Space Wolves tradition maintains he fell fighting enemies of the Imperium on a world whose name is no longer recorded in any archive. The wolf priests of that era made the decision to entomb him, recognizing that his knowledge and experience were too valuable to lose. The chassis they constructed for him incorporated technologies and craftsmanship that would become increasingly rare in later millennia, making his dreadnought body itself a relic of exceptional value beyond the warrior it contains. Bjorn's role within the Space Wolves extends far beyond that of a typical dreadnought. The chapter awakens him only rarely, understanding that each activation brings him closer to the final degradation that will end even his extended existence. When the Great Wolf faces decisions of exceptional importance, when the chapter confronts threats that require wisdom accumulated across millennia, when disputes about tradition or history cannot be resolved through normal means, Bjorn is roused from his slumber. His council carries absolute authority within the chapter, his word on matters of tradition and history accepted as definitive. He remembers the actual words of Leman Russ, can describe the Primarch's tactical preferences and strategic thinking from personal observation, and maintains knowledge of Space Wolves' customs as they were practiced during the Great Crusade, before 10,000 years of drift and evolution altered them. The physical appearance of Bjorn's dreadnought chassis reflects both his ancient origins and the Space Wolves' cultural traditions. The sarcophagus bears elaborate carvings depicting wolves and other imagery significant to Fenrisian culture, added and maintained over millennia by the chapter's artificers. His weapons have been replaced and upgraded countless times as technology evolved and battlefield requirements changed, but certain core components remain from his original internment, pieces of technology that the chapter's Iron Priests maintain with obsessive care despite no longer fully understanding their construction. The chassis itself shows signs of its immense age, with repair work from hundreds of battles visible in the patchwork of armor plates and the slight asymmetry that comes from millennia of damage and reconstruction. Bjorn's mental state represents a concern that the Space Wolves' wolf priests monitor carefully during his infrequent awakenings. The sheer span of time he has experienced, the countless cycles of sleep and waking separated by decades or centuries, has fragmented his memory and altered his consciousness in ways that even he acknowledges. He sometimes confuses current events with battles fought millennia ago, addresses living space wolves by the names of warriors dead for thousands of years, or speaks of the Emperor in present tense as though the master of mankind still walks among his armies. These episodes pass quickly, his mind reasserting itself and grasping the present reality, but they serve as reminders that even Bjorn's legendary endurance has limits. The wolf priests understand that eventually, perhaps within the next few centuries or millennia, the ancient warrior's consciousness will degrade beyond recovery, and the Imperium will lose its last direct link to the age when the Emperor led humanity's armies. The strategic value of Bjorn's continued existence extends beyond the space wolves to the Imperium as a whole. Inquisitors and high-ranking administratum officials have occasionally petitioned for access to him, seeking his testimony on historical events or his memories of the Emperor's intentions regarding various aspects of imperial policy. The Space Wolves refuse these requests with absolute consistency, maintaining that Bjorn belongs to the chapter, and that disturbing his rest for political or bureaucratic purposes dishonors his service. This has created tension with imperial authorities on multiple occasions, but the Space Wolves' reputation and their status as a first founding chapter gives them the autonomy to maintain this position despite external pressure. Brother Moryar the Chosen serves the Blood Angels as a Furioso Dreadnought, his chassis modified to accommodate the black rage that consumed him before his internment. Unlike most Dreadnoughts who retain their full mental faculties between the madness that comes from their affliction and the clarity provided by their machine prison, Moryar exists in a state of constant internal struggle. The Black Rage, the genetic curse that afflicts the sons of Sanguinius, fills his consciousness with visions of his Primarch's death at the hands of Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit. These visions do not come and go, but persist as a constant background to his thoughts, a perpetual replay of trauma and rage that would have destroyed a lesser warrior's sanity entirely. The Blood Angel's decision to entomb Moryar rather than allowing him to die in the Death Company, the traditional fate for those consumed by the Black Rage, reflected both his exceptional service before succumbing to the curse and the chapter's desperate need for experienced warriors during the period of his internment. He had served as a veteran sergeant, leading his squad through numerous campaigns and demonstrating tactical acumen that his superiors recognized as too valuable to waste in a single suicidal charge. When the Black Rage took him during a battle, whose specifics remain recorded only in the chapter's archives, the sanguinary priests made the unprecedented decision to preserve him within a Dreadnought chassis despite his compromised mental state. The Furioso pattern chassis that houses Moryar incorporates systems designed specifically for managing Death Company warriors, with enhanced restraints and control mechanisms that allow the Techmarines to shut down the Dreadnought's motor functions if the warrior within loses all control. The weapons mounted on his chassis focus entirely on close combat capabilities, with blood talons that can shred through infantry formations and armored targets with equal efficiency. The Blood Angels deploy him in situations where his rage becomes an asset rather than a liability, pointing him at enemy positions and allowing the Black Rage to drive him forward in devastating assaults that clear fortifications and break enemy formations through sheer ferocity. Moryar's continued service across millennia, despite the Black Rage that should have consumed him completely, stands as testament to both the strength of his will and the effectiveness of the Dreadnought systems in channeling his madness. Between battles, he sleeps more deeply than other Dreadnoughts, the sanguinary priests keeping him in an induced coma that suppresses the worst of the Black Rage's effects. When awakened for combat, they carefully manage his transition to consciousness, using a combination of chemical treatments and psychic conditioning to focus his rage on the enemy rather than allowing it to turn him into an uncontrolled berserker. The process does not always succeed perfectly, and there have been incidents where Moryar's fury overcame the control systems, requiring intervention from chaplains or librarians to restrain him before he could cause friendly casualties. The Blood Angels maintain Moryar as both a weapon and a warning. Young battle brothers are brought to see him during their training, confronting the reality of what the Black Rage means and understanding that even this fate, imprisonment within a machine while madness consumes your mind, represents a form of continued service to the chapter. The sanguinary priests study Morgur's condition extensively, hoping to gain insights into the Black Rage's mechanisms and perhaps develop better treatments or controls. His longevity despite the curse provides data that exists nowhere else, as Death Company warriors typically survive only hours or days after the Black Rage manifests, dying in battle before any long-term observations can be made. Ancient Rylander of the Emperor's Children represents a different kind of legend, one built not on millennia of continued service, but on a single act of defiance that echoed across 10,000 years. He served the Third Legion during the Great Crusade, earning the title Ancient of Rights through his exceptional service and bearing one of the Legion's sacred standards into battle. When the Horus Heresy erupted and Fulgrim led the Emperor's Children into corruption, Rylander found himself on Istvan III, part of the loyalist contingent that the traitor legions attempted to exterminate in the war's opening moves. The virus bombing that devastated the planet's surface left him mortally wounded, his body broken beyond even a space marine's ability to heal. The Emperor's Children tech marines who found him in the aftermath, themselves still loyal to the Emperor despite their legion's betrayal, made the decision to entomb him in a Contemptor Dreadnought chassis. They lacked proper facilities and resources, working with damaged equipment in the ruins of Istvan III, while traitor forces hunted survivors across the planet's surface. The internment process was crude by normal standards, performed without the usual rituals and with minimal medical support, but it succeeded in preserving Rylander's life and consciousness. The Tech Marines then placed him in stasis, hiding the Dreadnought in underground chambers where the traitors would not find him, intending to return once the immediate danger passed and extract him to Loyalist forces. They never returned, killed in the fighting that consumed Istvan III or lost in the larger catastrophe of the heresy. Rylander remained in stasis for 10,000 years, buried in the ruins of a dead world, his consciousness suspended while the galaxy burned and rebuilt itself around him. The isolation was absolute, a prison more complete than any cell, with no awareness of time passing and no knowledge of whether the Imperium had survived or fallen to chaos. When he finally awakened in the 41st millennium, disturbed by activity on Istvan III's surface, he found himself in a galaxy he barely recognized, where the Emperor's Children had become fully corrupted, and the Imperium he fought for had transformed into a theocratic nightmare. The circumstances of Rylander's final stand have become the subject of extensive documentation and analysis within Loyalist chapters, particularly among the Emperor's Children's successor organizations, and those chapters that maintain strong traditions of resistance to chaos corruption. Fulgrim himself came to Istvan III, drawn by reports of ancient Emperor's Children presence on the world, and confronted the Ancient of Rights in the ruins where he had slept for 10 millennia. The Demon Primarch attempted to sway Rylander to chaos, offering power and restoration, promising to repair his broken body and grant him pleasures beyond mortal comprehension. Rylander's response was absolute rejection, his loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium unchanged despite 10,000 years of isolation. The Ancient of Rights had prepared for this confrontation, spending the time since his awakening modifying his Dreadnought chassis into a massive bomb, a weapon designed specifically to destroy Fulgrim. The virus bomb he had incorporated into his systems, scavenged from Istvan III's ruins, would not kill a Demon Primarch permanently, but would banish Fulgrim back to the warp and deny him physical form for centuries or millennia. Rylander detonated his chassis, sacrificing himself in an attempt to wound the creature his Primarch had become. The explosion failed to destroy Fulgrim, the Demon Primarch's powers protecting him from the worst effects, but the symbolism of the act resonated far beyond its immediate tactical impact. Rylander's defiance, his absolute refusal to compromise his loyalty, even after 10,000 years alone, and facing a Primarch's direct attention, became a story that spread through the Imperium's loyalist forces. Chapters that trace their lineage to the Emperor's Children, organizations like the Sons of the Phoenix and others whose gene seed carries the Third Legion's markers, hold Rylander as their ultimate exemplar, proof that loyalty to the Emperor transcends even Primarch-level corruption. His name is invoked in oaths of moment, his deeds recited in chapter ceremonies, and his sacrifice remembered as the ultimate expression of a space marine's duty. Tancred of the Black Templars has achieved legendary status through sheer endurance and an apparent inability to die regardless of the damage inflicted on his chassis. His service spans several millennia, though the exact duration remains unclear, as the Black Templars' record-keeping focuses more on crusades and battles than precise chronology. What is certain is that Tancred has participated in dozens of major campaigns, his Dreadnought chassis accumulating damage and repair work that has transformed it into a patchwork of different armor plates, weapon systems, and components scavenged from battlefields across the galaxy. The original chassis configuration has been lost under layers of modification and repair, making it impossible to determine which pattern he was originally interred in. The cry that has become synonymous with Tancred, the simple declaration that he endures, emerged from a battle on Armageddon during one of that world's many wars. Tancred's Dreadnought had been severely damaged, with multiple systems failing and his chassis literally falling apart around him. Orc forces surrounded him, their crude but effective weapons tearing through already compromised armor. The Black Templars' forces nearby heard his Vox transmission, a simple statement of fact broadcast on all channels as he continued fighting despite catastrophic damage. The orcs destroyed his legs and he fought from a prone position. They tore off one arm and he continued firing with the other. The chassis' power system failed, and he manually operated his remaining weapons through backup systems. When reinforcements finally reached his position, they found Tancred still fighting, his Dreadnought reduced to little more than a sarcophagus with a single functioning weapon, surrounded by dozens of dead orcs. The incident became legend within the Black Templars, the simple phrase capturing something essential about the chapter's character and their refusal to accept defeat regardless of circumstances. Tancred himself seems to embody this principle, surviving situations that should have resulted in his permanent destruction through a combination of skill, luck, and sheer stubborn refusal to die. His chassis has been rebuilt so many times that the tech marines who maintain it joke that they could construct a second Dreadnought from the spare parts they have replaced over the centuries. Each reconstruction incorporates whatever materials and components are available at the time, leading to the hodgepodge appearance that makes Tancred's Dreadnought instantly recognizable. The Black Templars deploy Tancred in the most dangerous situations, understanding that his experience and apparent indestructibility make him ideal for missions where other forces would be overwhelmed. He has led boarding actions against space hulks, held defensive positions against impossible odds, and spearheaded assaults on fortified positions that other commanders considered impregnable. His tactical approach favors direct action over subtlety, reflecting both his personal character and the Black Templars' general doctrine. When Tancred advances, the enemy knows they face a warrior who will not stop, will not retreat, and will continue fighting until either they are dead or he is finally destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. The psychological impact of Tancred's continued survival affects both his battle brothers and the enemies who face him. Black Templars fighting alongside him draw inspiration from his presence, their faith in the Emperor reinforced by witnessing a warrior who has endured for millennia through countless battles that should have killed him. Enemy forces who recognize his distinctive chassis often falter, understanding that they face a legend whose reputation is built on surviving everything the galaxy has thrown at him. The simple knowledge that Tancred endures, that he has outlasted countless enemies and will likely outlast them as well, creates a morale effect that extends beyond his immediate combat capabilities. The Dreadnoughts who turned traitor during the Horus Heresy represent a particular tragedy within the larger catastrophe of the Civil War that nearly destroyed the Imperium. These warriors had earned their entombment through exceptional service during the Great Crusade, their bodies broken in humanity's cause, while their minds remained sharp and their loyalty seemingly unquestionable. When the War Master's rebellion erupted, many of these ancient veterans found themselves forced to choose between their Primarchs and the Emperor, a decision that should never have been necessary. The Dreadnoughts of the traitor legions faced this choice from a position of unique vulnerability. Unlike their battle brothers who could potentially flee or hide their allegiance, the entombed warriors depended entirely on their chapter's techmarines for maintenance, repair, and even the basic function of being awakened from stasis. A dreadnought who declared loyalty to the Emperor while his legion-turned traitor would simply be left in stasis, powerless to act on his convictions, or worse, deliberately killed through sabotage of his life support systems. The majority of traitor dreadnoughts followed their legions into rebellion not through genuine corruption, but through loyalty to their primarchs and battle brothers. A warrior who had served under Horus for decades or centuries, who had fought alongside the Luna Wolves through countless campaigns, found it nearly impossible to believe that the Warmaster had truly turned against the Emperor. The initial explanations offered by the traitor legions, that the Emperor had betrayed his sons, or that the rebellion was necessary to save the Imperium from corrupt influences, seemed plausible to warriors whose information came entirely from sources controlled by the traitors. By the time the true nature of chaos corruption became undeniable, many dreadnoughts had already participated in actions that marked them as traitors regardless of their original intentions. They had fired upon loyalist forces, destroyed Imperial installations, and killed battle brothers who remained faithful to Terra. The path back to loyalty had been closed by their own actions, leaving them bound to the traitor cause whether they still believed in it or not. The actual corruption of these dreadnoughts proceeded gradually in most cases, a process of incremental compromise rather than sudden transformation. The traitor legion's descent into chaos worship did not happen overnight, but developed across the years of the heresy as desperation, rage, and exposure to the warp's influence eroded their remaining principles. The dreadnoughts witnessed their legions changing, saw their battle brothers embracing powers and practices that would have been unthinkable during the Great Crusade, and faced the choice of accepting these changes or being destroyed as obstacles to the legion's new path. The word-bearers dreadnoughts watched their legion embrace worship of the chaos gods with religious fervor, their chaplains becoming dark apostles who preached damnation as salvation. The Emperor's children's entombed warriors saw their brothers pursue sensation and excess to increasingly horrific extremes, the pursuit of perfection twisting into grotesque hedonism. The Iron Warriors' dreadnoughts experienced perhaps the most pragmatic corruption, their legion's embrace of chaos driven more by bitterness and spite than religious conviction. Perdurabo's forces had spent the Great Crusade assigned to the most grinding, thankless campaigns, building siege works and reducing fortifications, while other legions earned glory in more dramatic victories. The resentment that festered within the legion affected the dreadnoughts as much as any other warrior, their centuries of service feeling increasingly like exploitation rather than honor. When Perdurabo turned against the Imperium, many of his dreadnoughts followed not because they believed in chaos, but because they wanted to punish the Imperium that had used them without appreciation. The corruption came later, seeping into them through exposure to the warp and the gradual realization that they had bound themselves to powers that would never release them. The transformation from loyalist dreadnought to chaos-corrupted war machine involves more than simple allegiance change. The warp's influence affects the dreadnought chassis itself, warping metal and corrupting machine spirits in ways that mirror the physical mutations experienced by Chaos Space Marines. The process begins subtly, with minor malfunctions and strange readings that the traitor legion's warpsmiths initially dismiss as battle damage or normal degradation. The dreadnought's armor develops discolorations that resist cleaning, patterns that seem to writhe when observed peripherally. The Vox speakers begin producing odd harmonics beneath the warrior's voice, sounds that cause unease in listeners without clear reason. The chassis' movements become slightly off, jerky motions or unnatural fluidity that suggests something beyond simple mechanical operation. As corruption deepens, the changes become impossible to ignore or explain through conventional mechanical failure. The armor plating begins growing, new layers of metal appearing without any warpsmith's intervention, often incorporating organic elements that blur the line between machine and flesh. Spikes emerge from the hull, their purpose unclear but their appearance disturbingly regular, as though following some design that exists outside normal geometry. The weapon systems develop minds of their own, displaying preferences for certain targets or firing patterns that the entombed warrior does not consciously choose. The sarcophagus itself changes, its interior environment shifting as the amniotic fluid takes on properties that serve the Chaos God's purposes rather than the warrior's survival. The Hellbrute represents the ultimate expression of Chaos Dreadnought corruption, a fusion of demon, space marine, and machine that has lost any clear distinction between these components. The transformation into a Hellbrute typically occurs when a Chaos Space Marine is interred within a Dreadnought chassis without the proper rituals and safeguards that Loyalist chapters employ. The traitor legions and their successor warbands often lack the resources or knowledge to perform correct entombment procedures, their warpsmiths working with incomplete information and improvised equipment. The resulting fusion is unstable from the beginning, the warrior's consciousness improperly integrated with the machine's spirit and vulnerable to demonic possession. The warp exploits these vulnerabilities, entities from the Imperium drawn to the warrior's pain and rage, seeing the improperly sealed sarcophagus as an opportunity for manifestation in real space. Demonic possession of a Hellbrute does not follow the same pattern as possession of a living body. The demon must contend not just with the Space Marine's consciousness, but with the machine's spirit of the chassis and the various warp-corrupted systems that have developed their own quasi-sentience. The result is a Gestalt entity, a fusion where it becomes impossible to determine where the original warrior ends and the demon begins. The Hellbrute's consciousness exists in constant flux, moments of clarity, where the original Space Marine's personality surfaces, alternating with periods where the demon dominates, or where the machine's spirit's alien logic takes control. This instability makes Hellbrutes unpredictable and dangerous even to their own forces, their actions guided by motivations that shift moment to moment as control passes between the different entities sharing the chassis. The physical appearance of Hellbrutes reflects their internal corruption in ways that make them immediately distinguishable from Loyalist Dreadnoughts. The chassis has been warped beyond any standard pattern, its structure twisted into configurations that should be mechanically impossible. Limbs extend at wrong angles, joint assemblies that rotate in directions that violate normal geometry. The armor plating has fused with organic matter, cables and mechanical components growing through what appears to be muscle tissue or exposed organs. Faces sometimes appear in the metal, screaming visages that might be previous victims, aspects of the demon within, or manifestations of the Hellbrute's own torment. The weapons have become part of the creature, rather than simply mounted armaments, grown into the limbs rather than attached to them, fed by veins that pulse with unnatural fluids alongside ammunition feeds. The sarcophagus of a Hellbrute has become a torture device as much as a life support system. The amniotic fluid has transformed into something that keeps the warrior alive while causing constant agony, its chemical composition designed to maximize suffering rather than provide comfort. The neural interface connections have proliferated, additional plugs and cables growing into the warrior's brain and nervous system without any clear purpose beyond increasing his integration with the corrupted machine. The Space Marine's body, what remains of it, has often merged with the sarcophagus interior, his flesh growing into the metal walls, making it impossible to determine where his organic components end and the machine begins. This fusion is not clean or organized but chaotic, with organs displaced from their normal positions, bones fused with structural supports, and sensory organs relocated to positions where they can perceive things no human was meant to witness. The psychological torment experienced by Chaos Dreadnoughts and Hellbrutes exceeds anything their Loyalist counterparts endure. Where Loyalist Dreadnoughts suffer from isolation and the gradual loss of humanity, Chaos Dreadnoughts face active torture from the powers they serve. The Chaos Gods and their demonic servants have no interest in preserving the sanity or comfort of their weapons. The warrior's consciousness is deliberately kept active and aware, prevented from retreating into madness or unconsciousness that might provide escape from his suffering. The warp whispers constantly into his mind, voices that promise relief while delivering only greater torment, entities that show him visions of what he has become and what he has lost. The demon bound within the Hellbrute feeds on the Space Marine's anguish, growing stronger from his suffering, while ensuring he remains conscious enough to experience every moment of it. The realization of damnation represents perhaps the cruelest aspect of Chaos Dreadnought existence. Unlike living Chaos Space Marines, who can still harbor delusions about their choices or believe they maintain some control over their fate, the Dreadnought understands completely what he has become. He cannot ignore the evidence of his corruption when it surrounds him constantly, when his own body has transformed into something that violates every principle he once held. He knows that no redemption is possible, that the Imperium would destroy him on sight even if he somehow retained loyalty to the Emperor, that his soul is forfeit to the warp regardless of any actions he might take. This knowledge creates a despair that goes beyond normal emotional suffering, a spiritual anguish that corrodes whatever remains of his original personality. Many Chaos Dreadnoughts and Hellbrutes embrace madness as their only escape from this realization. They allow their consciousness to fragment, retreating into delusions or letting rage consume their rational thought. The berserker fury that Hellbrutes display on the battlefield stems not from tactical doctrine, but from desperate need to lose themselves in violence, to find in combat the oblivion that suspended animation no longer provides. When a Hellbrute charges enemy positions with no regard for tactics or self-preservation, it is not displaying courage but seeking death, hoping that sufficient damage will finally destroy the cursed fusion of flesh and machine that imprisons it. The tragedy is that Hellbrutes are remarkably difficult to kill, their demonic components regenerating damage, and their warp-infused systems continuing to function despite catastrophic destruction. A Hellbrute that should have been annihilated by concentrated fire often rises again, its body reknitting through impossible processes, forcing the warrior within to continue existing despite his desperate wish for final death. The Death Guard's Dreadnoughts embody Nurgle's particular brand of corruption, their chassis transformed into mobile plague factories that spread disease wherever they march. The entombed warriors have been claimed by Grandfather Nurgle, their bodies rotting within their sarcophagi while remaining somehow alive, preserved in a state of eternal decay. The amniotic fluid has become a soup of virulent diseases, each one a gift from the plague god, keeping the Space Marine in a state where death would be mercy, but never quite arrives. The chassis itself has become a garden of corruption, with fungi growing from the armor plating, rust spreading across surfaces in patterns that spell out Nurgle's names in bacterial colonies, and mechanical components seized by corrosion, yet somehow still functioning. The weapons these Dreadnoughts carry spread contagion with every shot, their ammunition contaminated with plagues that can devastate entire populations. The Death Guard's Dreadnoughts experience their corruption differently than other Chaos Dreadnoughts because Nurgle's influence brings a twisted form of acceptance. The Plague God teaches that decay is natural, that fighting against entropy is futile, and that there is peace in accepting one's dissolution. The entombed warriors find their anguish gradually replaced by a horrifying contentment, their suffering recontextualized as Nurgle's affection. They come to see their rotting bodies and corrupted chassis as blessings, gifts from a god who loves them enough to keep them alive despite their decay. This transformation of perspective might seem like mercy compared to the active torment other Chaos Dreadnoughts experience, but it represents a more complete corruption, the warrior's very capacity to recognize his damnation eroded by the plague god's influence. The Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts present a unique case within Chaos forces, because many of them are not truly alive in any conventional sense. When Ahriman cast the rubric that transformed the majority of the Thousand Suns into dust-filled armor, some Dreadnoughts were caught in the spell's effect. The warriors within their sarcophagi were reduced to ash, their consciousness bound to their armor through sorcery rather than maintained through biological life support. These rubric Dreadnoughts function as animated war machines, their movements guided by the trapped soul's will, but lacking any physical body beyond the dust that represents their remains. They experience existence as a form of sensory deprivation, more complete than any loyalist Dreadnought endures, aware of their surroundings only through the chassis sensors, unable to feel anything beyond the cold certainty of their own death and continued animation. The Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts who retain their physical forms, those powerful enough in sorcery to resist the rubric's effects, face different torments. They have watched their legion transform into hollow shells, their battle brothers reduced to automata that follow orders without thought or personality. The surviving Dreadnoughts maintain their consciousness and magical abilities, serving as mobile artillery platforms that channel devastating sorcerous powers through their weapon systems. The chassis has been modified to accommodate this, with runes carved into every surface, psychic-focusing crystals integrated into the armor, and the sarcophagus itself transformed into a meditation chamber where the warrior can better channel the warp's energies. These sorcerer Dreadnoughts wield powers that can unmake reality, their spells amplified by the arcane modifications to their chassis, but they do so knowing they are among the last true Thousand Sons, surrounded by the animated remains of brothers they once knew. The World Eater's Dreadnoughts have been claimed by Khorne, their consciousness subsumed by rage so complete that little remains of their original personalities. The Butcher's nails, the neural implants that drove the World Eaters to escalating violence even before their fall to chaos, continue functioning within the Dreadnought sarcophagi, their pain-inducing signals integrated with the neural interface systems. The result is warriors who exist in perpetual agony, the nails firing constantly, driving them to seek violence as the only possible relief. The World Eater's warpsmiths have modified their Dreadnoughts to enhance this aggression, removing safety limiters and control systems, installing additional weapon systems that allow the entombed warriors to kill more efficiently, and reinforcing the chassis to withstand the damage that inevitably results from their suicidal combat tactics. These Khornate Dreadnoughts charge into battle with no concern for tactics or survival, their only goal to close with the enemy and kill until their chassis is finally destroyed or no enemies remain. The armor bears the marks of countless battles, covered in dried blood that never seems to completely wash away, decorated with skulls taken from defeated enemies, and inscribed with Khorne's runes that glow with baleful light during combat. The weapons have been modified for maximum lethality, chain axes the size of men, power claws that can tear through battle tanks, and close-range weapons that sacrifice any pretense of accuracy for raw destructive power. The entombed warriors have largely lost the ability to speak coherently, their vox transmissions consisting mainly of roars and battle cries, though occasionally fragments of their former personalities surface in moments of brief clarity between the rage. The Emperor's Children's Dreadnoughts serve Slaanesh, their corruption focused on sensation and excess rather than rage or decay. The modifications to their chassis reflect this, with the sarcophagi transformed into chambers designed to provide impossible levels of sensory stimulation. The amniotic fluid has been infused with substances that create hallucinations and heightened sensation, the neural interface modified to amplify every input to levels that would kill an unmodified human through pure sensory overload. The entombed warriors experience reality as a cascade of overwhelming sensation, every moment bringing inputs so intense they border on pain, yet never quite achieving the satisfaction they crave. This drives them to seek ever more extreme experiences, their actions on the battlefield motivated by the desperate need to feel something that will finally satisfy their corrupted senses. The weapons carried by Emperor's Children Dreadnoughts have been modified to provide feedback to the wielder, allowing the entombed warrior to experience the sensation of killing through his weapon systems. Sonic weapons that shatter targets with focused sound waves transmit the vibrations back through the chassis, letting the warrior feel the destruction he causes. Close combat weapons incorporate sensory feeds that transmit the sensation of tearing through flesh and armor, providing visceral feedback that normal Dreadnoughts never experience. The chassis itself has been decorated in ways that reflect Slaanesh's aesthetic, with colors that seem to shift and change, surfaces polished to impossible smoothness, and decorations that combine beauty and horror in ways that disturb anyone who looks at them too long. The Night Lord's Dreadnoughts maintain more of their original personalities than those claimed by the four major Chaos gods, their corruption stemming from bitterness and hatred rather than devotion to any particular power. These warriors remember the Night Lord's original purpose as the Emperor's executioners, the role they played in bringing compliance to worlds through terror and exemplary violence. They watched their legion descend from harsh but purposeful enforcers into sadistic murderers who killed for pleasure rather than duty. Many Night Lords Dreadnoughts retain enough clarity to understand what they have become, to recognize that they are no longer the warriors they once were, and this awareness creates a nihilistic rage that makes them dangerous even by Chaos Dreadnought standards. The Night Lords equip their Dreadnoughts with weapons and systems designed to maximize terror rather than simple killing efficiency. Voxcasters that broadcast screams and horrific sounds, searchlights that illuminate victims before they die, and weapons that cause maximum suffering rather than quick death. The chassis is decorated with the flayed skins of previous victims, trophies that serve both as psychological warfare tools and as expressions of the entombed warrior's contempt for everything he once believed in. These Dreadnoughts often operate independently, their warband using them as terror weapons deployed against specific targets where their reputation and horrific appearance will create maximum psychological impact. The Black Legion's Dreadnoughts come from various original legions, warriors who have joined Abaddon's forces and been modified to serve the War Master's purposes. These Dreadnoughts display corruption from all four Chaos Gods, and sometimes from multiple powers simultaneously, their chassis bearing marks of different patrons, as the warrior within serves whichever god offers the most immediate benefit. This flexibility makes Black Legion Dreadnoughts particularly dangerous because they can adapt their capabilities based on the situation, channeling Khorne's rage in close combat, Nurgle's resilience when under sustained fire, Tzeentch's sorcery for ranged support, or Slaanesh's speed for rapid advances. The cost of this versatility is instability, the warrior's soul pulled in multiple directions by competing powers, his consciousness fragmenting under the strain of serving multiple masters who each demand absolute devotion. The deployment of Chaos Dreadnoughts and Hellbrutes in battle follows different patterns than Loyalist forces employ. The traitor legions and their warbands lack the reverence for their entombed warriors that Loyalist chapters maintain, viewing them more as weapons to be expended than honored veterans to be preserved. Hellbrutes are often deployed in the first wave of assaults, sent forward to absorb enemy fire and create breaches that other forces can exploit. The entombed warriors understand they are being used as disposable assets, that their commanders care nothing for their survival, and this knowledge feeds their rage and desperation. They charge enemy positions with suicidal fury, not from courage, but from the hope that this battle will finally bring the destruction they crave. The maintenance and repair of Chaos Dreadnoughts falls to the Warpsmiths, Chaos Space Marines who have replaced the Loyalist Tech Marines' devotion to the Omnissiah with worship of the Dark Mechanicum and the Ruinous Powers. These corrupted tech adepts approach Dreadnought maintenance very differently than their Loyalist counterparts, viewing the machines not as sacred relics, but as tools to be modified and enhanced without concern for the warrior within. Warpsmiths regularly perform experimental modifications, installing demon engines into the chassis, grafting additional weapon systems without regard for the increased neural load, and making changes that increase combat effectiveness while accelerating the entombed warrior's degradation. The Chaos Dreadnoughts have no choice but to accept these modifications, their dependence on the Warpsmiths for basic maintenance giving them no leverage to refuse even the most horrific alterations. The Eldar approach to preserving their warriors beyond death stems from fundamentally different principles than the Imperium's Dreadnought technology, yet the battlefield results bear striking similarities. The Wraithlord represents the Eldari solution to the same problem that Dreadnoughts address: how to retain the combat effectiveness of fallen warriors whose experience and skill are too valuable to lose. The critical difference lies in the Eldar's understanding of the soul and their ability to manipulate psychic energy in ways that humanity cannot match. When an Eldar warrior dies, their soul faces immediate danger from Slaanesh, the Chaos God born from the Eldar's own fall who hungers eternally for Eldari souls. The spirit stones that every Eldar carries serve as soul traps, capturing the warrior's consciousness at the moment of death and preventing she who thirsts from claiming them. The Wraithlord chassis provides a physical vessel for these captured souls, allowing the dead to continue serving their craftworld in a form that can still influence the material universe. The construction differs entirely from Imperial Dreadnoughts, built not from metal and ceramite, but from wraithbone, a psychoplastic material that the Eldar shape through psychic manipulation rather than conventional manufacturing. The wraithbone responds to psychic energy, forming structures that are simultaneously organic and artificial, blending properties of living tissue with the durability of advanced materials. A Wraithlord stands taller than an Imperial Dreadnought, its proportions more elegant despite its massive size, with limbs that maintain the grace of Eldar design even at this enlarged scale. The spirit stone containing the warrior's soul sits at the construct's core, connected through psychic circuits rather than neural interfaces, allowing the consciousness within to perceive and control the wraithbone body through methods that have no equivalent in human technology. The experience of existence within a Wraithlord differs substantially from Dreadnought internment because the Eldar soul remains fundamentally psychic in nature. The warrior does not interface with the construct through crude mechanical connections, but through resonance between their consciousness and the wraithbone structure. This creates a relationship where the boundaries between pilot and vehicle become blurred in ways that even the most sophisticated mind impulse unit cannot achieve. The Wraithlord becomes an extension of the warrior's will rather than a machine they control, responding to intention rather than conscious command. This integration allows for fluid movement and reaction times that Imperial Dreadnoughts cannot match, the wraithbone construct flowing through combat with a grace that seems impossible for something so large. The Eldar view their Wraithlords with profound ambivalence, seeing them as both necessary warriors and tragic reminders of their race's decline. Before the fall, the Eldar would never have disturbed the dead, allowing souls to pass into the afterlife rather than binding them to continued service. The current practice represents a compromise born from desperation, the craftworld's populations too small and too precious to allow even the dead to rest when enemies threaten their survival. The spirit seers who maintain the Wraithlords and communicate with the souls within perform their duties with a mixture of reverence and sorrow, understanding that they are denying these warriors the peace they deserve. The process of awakening a Wraithlord requires a spirit seer to establish psychic contact with the soul within the spirit stone, gently rousing the consciousness from whatever dreams or memories occupy it during dormancy. The souls within Wraithlords experience their existence very differently from Space Marines in Dreadnoughts because Eldar consciousness operates on fundamentally different principles. The warrior retains full access to their memories and personality, their sense of self undimmed by the transition to their wraithbone body. They remember not just their life, but the sensations and emotions that accompanied it, maintaining a connection to their past that Dreadnoughts gradually lose. This preservation of identity comes with its own burden, as the warrior remains fully aware of what they have lost, able to recall the taste of food they can no longer eat, the warmth of sunlight they can no longer feel, and the company of loved ones they can no longer truly interact with. The Wraithlord can see and hear, can move and fight, but cannot experience the physical world with the richness and nuance that living Eldar take for granted. The Wraith Knight represents an evolution of the Wraithlord concept, scaled up to face the largest threats the Eldar encounter on the battlefield. These towering constructs stand as tall as Imperial Titans, their wraithbone frames capable of mounting weapons that can engage enemy super-heavy vehicles and monstrous creatures on equal terms. The Wraith Knight requires 2 spirit stones rather than 1, typically containing the souls of warriors who fought together in life, often twins or siblings, whose psychic resonance allows them to coordinate control of the massive construct. The dual soul configuration provides the processing capacity needed to manage the Wraith Knight's complex systems and the enormous psychic load of controlling something so large. The 2 consciousnesses must work in perfect harmony, their thoughts synchronized through the Wraithbone matrix, essentially functioning as a single entity despite their separate origins. The weapon systems mounted on Wraithlords and Wraith Knights reflect Eldar technological sophistication, utilizing principles that the Imperium's tech priests would classify as heretical or impossible. Scatter lasers fire focused beams of laser energy at rates that dwarf Imperial equivalents, their targeting systems guided by the pilot's psychic perception rather than mechanical cogitators. Bright lances concentrate massive amounts of energy into single devastating shots capable of punching through the heaviest armor, their focusing crystals grown rather than manufactured. Star cannons project pulses of plasma contained within gravitic fields, the shots maintaining coherence across distances where Imperial plasma weapons would dissipate. The close combat weapons that Wraith Lords carry, massive Wraithbone blades or fists, channel psychic energy that disrupts the molecular structure of whatever they strike, combining physical impact with psychic disruption in ways that make them effective against both material and demonic targets. The Orcs' approach to heavy walker technology demonstrates their species' characteristic combination of crude engineering and inexplicable functionality. The Def Dread represents the Orcish equivalent to Imperial Dreadnoughts, though the comparison breaks down quickly under closer examination. Where Space Marines are entombed in Dreadnoughts only after suffering catastrophic injuries, Orcs volunteer for Def Dread conversion, seeing it as an opportunity to become bigger, tougher, and more capable of violence. The mechboys who construct Def Dreads work with whatever materials are available, welding together scrap metal, looted Imperial components, and pieces of destroyed vehicles into a roughly bipedal chassis that should not function according to any rational engineering principles, but somehow does through the Orc's latent psychic field. The Orc pilot is not carefully preserved in a sophisticated life support system, but simply bolted into the chassis with minimal concern for his comfort or long-term survival. The mechboys cut away whatever parts of the Orc's body interfere with fitting him into the available space, replacing lost limbs with direct connections to the Def Dread's weapon systems. The process involves no anesthetic and minimal medical care by any civilized standard, the Orc's robust physiology allowing him to survive trauma that would kill most other species. The neural interface consists of crude cables jacked directly into the Orc's brain, transmitting signals through methods that seem to work through sheer bloody-mindedness rather than sophisticated technology. The pilot experiences constant pain from his injuries and the crude augmentation, but Orcs interpret pain differently than humans, viewing it as just another sensation to be ignored in favor of getting into combat. The Def Dread's appearance reflects Orcish aesthetic preferences, which prioritize intimidation and obvious firepower over elegance or efficiency. The chassis bristles with weapons, typically mounting multiple close combat implements like massive power claws or ripsaw attachments, alongside ranged weapons such as rockets or big shooters. The armor plating consists of thick slabs of metal welded together, with no attempt at streamlining or weight optimization, the whole construction painted in garish colors that identify the pilot's clan affiliation. Spikes, skulls, and other trophies decorate every available surface, and the Orc often has a loudspeaker system installed so he can bellow challenges and insults at enemies while advancing. The Def Dread moves with a lurching gait that suggests imminent mechanical failure, yet somehow continues functioning through battles that would disable more sophisticated machines. The Kilocan represents a smaller version of the same concept, piloted not by Orcs but by Gretchen, the smaller greenskin subspecies that Orcs use as laborers and cannon fodder. The Gretchen are stuffed into even more cramped chassis, their small size allowing the mechboys to build walking weapons platforms that are cheaper and easier to construct than full Def Dreads. The Gretchen pilots experience their role with a mixture of terror and excitement, knowing that the Kilocan offers them protection and firepower they could never achieve in their normal forms, but also that the Orcs view them as expendable and will send them into the most dangerous situations without hesitation. The Kilocans typically operate in mobs, their pilots finding courage in numbers, and their combined firepower making them effective against infantry and light vehicles, despite their individually modest capabilities. The Tau Empire's approach to heavy battlesuit technology reflects their species' emphasis on ranged firepower and technological innovation over close combat prowess. The XV-88 broadside battlesuit serves as the Tau's heavy fire support platform, mounting weapons systems that can engage enemy armor at extreme ranges. Unlike Dreadnoughts or Wraithlords, the broadside is piloted by a living Tau warrior who enters and exits the suit as needed, the battlesuit serving as equipment rather than a permanent body. The pilot sits in a cockpit protected by thick armor plating, controlling the suit through neural interfaces that provide feedback without requiring permanent integration. The weapons mounted on broadsides focus entirely on ranged engagement, with heavy rail rifles capable of accelerating projectiles to hypersonic velocities or missile pods that can saturate areas with smart munitions. The XV-104 Riptide battlesuit represents the Tau's most advanced heavy battlesuit technology, standing significantly taller than a broadside and mounting even more powerful weapon systems. The Riptide's primary armament typically consists of an ion accelerator capable of firing devastating energy blasts or a heavy burst cannon that can shred infantry formations with massed fire. The suit incorporates a Nova reactor that the pilot can overcharge to temporarily enhance the battlesuit's capabilities, pushing shields to maximum strength or supercharging weapons beyond their normal operational parameters. This overcharge capability comes with risks, as pushing the reactor too hard can cause system failures or even catastrophic overloads, but Tau pilots train extensively to manage these risks and know when the tactical situation justifies the danger. The Tau pilot's experience differs fundamentally from that of a Dreadnought's entombed warrior because the Tau maintains their normal life outside the battlesuit. After combat, the pilot exits the suit and returns to their normal existence, eating, sleeping, and socializing as any other Tau would. The battlesuit represents a tool they use rather than a prison they inhabit, and while Tau pilots develop strong bonds with their suits and take pride in their performance, they do not face the existential horror of permanent entombment. This allows Tau battlesuit pilots to maintain psychological stability across long careers, their mental health supported by normal social connections, and the ability to experience life beyond warfare. The Tau do lose pilots to combat, but when a broadside or riptide is destroyed, they recover the suit if possible and assign a new pilot, rather than treating each chassis as inseparable from its operator. The Tyranid approach to heavy assault units demonstrates the hive mind solution through biological engineering rather than technology. The Carnifex serves as the Tyranid equivalent to heavy walkers, a living battering ram designed to smash through enemy fortifications and destroy armored vehicles through sheer physical power. The creature stands on 4 massive legs, its body protected by layers of chitin armor that can resist heavy weapons fire, its forelimbs modified into whatever configuration the hive mind determines most useful for the current invasion. Some Carnifexes carry bioweapons that spit corrosive fluids or launch parasitic organisms, while others simply mount massive crushing claws or scything talons designed to tear through armor plating and fortified walls. The Carnifex possesses no individual consciousness in any meaningful sense, its actions directed entirely by the hive mind's will, making it more analogous to a remote-controlled weapon than a piloted vehicle. The Hive Tyrant represents a more sophisticated approach, a creature that serves as a synaptic node for the hive mind, while also functioning as a powerful combat unit. The Tyrant stands upright on 2 legs, its body protected by armor plating that rivals the thickness found on Imperial tanks, its multiple arms wielding bioweapons that can engage targets at range or in close combat. Unlike the Carnifex, which functions as a simple brute, the Hive Tyrant possesses enough autonomy to make tactical decisions within the parameters set by the hive mind. It can assess battlefield conditions, prioritize targets, and coordinate the actions of lesser Tyranid organisms in its vicinity. The Tyrant's presence strengthens the synaptic web that connects Tyranid organisms, allowing them to function with greater coordination and preventing the instinctive behavior that overtakes Tyranids when separated from the hive mind's influence. The Tyrannid approach eliminates many of the problems that plague technological solutions to heavy assault units. Carnifexes and hive tyrants require no maintenance beyond consuming biomass to fuel their metabolisms. They can regenerate from damage that would permanently disable a mechanical walker, and they can be rapidly replaced by simply growing new organisms from the genetic templates stored in the hive fleet's bioships. The hive mind feels no compunction about expending these creatures, viewing them as disposable resources to be sacrificed whenever tactical advantage demands it. A Carnifex that charges into concentrated enemy fire and dies after destroying a single target has served its purpose perfectly from the hive mind's perspective. The biomass invested in its creation recovered when the Tyrannids consume the battlefields dead after victory. The diversity of approaches to heavy walker units across different species reflects the fundamental differences in how each civilization approaches warfare and technology. The Imperium's Dreadnoughts preserve individual warriors at enormous cost, maintaining their experience and identity even as their humanity slowly erodes. The Eldar bind the souls of the dead to wraithbone constructs through psychic manipulation, creating warriors who retain their full consciousness but are forever separated from the life they once knew. The Orcs simply shove injured boys into crude metal chassis and send them charging at the enemy, caring nothing for sophistication or long-term survival. The Tau build advanced battlesuits as tools for their pilots to use, maintaining the distinction between warrior and weapon. The Tyrannids grow living weapons that serve the hive mind's purposes without any individual identity or will. These different approaches produce units that fulfill similar battlefield roles while operating under completely different philosophical frameworks. An Imperial Dreadnought, an Eldar Wraithlord, an Orc Def Dread, a Tau Riptide, and a Tyrannid Carnifex can all engage enemy armor, support infantry advances, and serve as mobile fire platforms. Yet the experience of the entities controlling or inhabiting these war machines could not be more different. The Space Marine endures his existence as a living relic. The Eldar soul mourns what it has lost. The Orc revels in his increased capacity for violence. The Tau pilot performs their duty with professional competence, and the Tyrannid organism simply executes the hive mind's will without thought or feeling. The deployment of Dreadnoughts within Space Marine battle doctrine represents a carefully calculated decision that balances their immense combat capabilities against their irreplaceable nature. Chapter Masters and their command staff understand that every Dreadnought represents not just a powerful weapons platform, but a living link to their chapter's history, a warrior whose experience and knowledge cannot be replaced if lost. This tension between utility and preservation shapes how Dreadnoughts are employed across different tactical situations, and explains why their deployment patterns vary significantly between chapters based on their specific doctrines and the number of functional chassis they maintain. The use of Dreadnoughts as anchor points for defensive positions exploits their combination of heavy armor and sustained firepower to create strongpoints that enemy forces struggle to dislodge. When Space Marines establish defensive lines, a Dreadnought positioned at a critical juncture can hold ground that would require an entire squad of battle brothers to defend with equivalent effectiveness. The chassis' armor allows it to absorb fire that would suppress or eliminate infantry, while its weapons provide the firepower to destroy enemy vehicles attempting to break through the line. The Dreadnought's presence also provides a psychological anchor for defending forces, the sight of the ancient warrior standing immobile against enemy assault, reinforcing the determination of nearby battle brothers to hold their positions. The Imperial Fists and their successor chapters have refined this defensive employment to a high art, their siege warfare doctrine incorporating Dreadnoughts as mobile bastions that can be repositioned as the tactical situation evolves. During the defense of fortified positions, Imperial Fist's Dreadnoughts take up positions covering approach routes and kill zones, their weapons configured for maximum effectiveness against the expected enemy composition. Lascannon armed Dreadnoughts position themselves with clear fields of fire against armor approach routes, while assault cannon configurations cover areas where enemy infantry must advance. The Dreadnoughts maintain communication with the defensive commander, providing real-time battlefield assessment based on their centuries of experience in siege warfare, often identifying weaknesses in the defense that younger officers might miss. The deployment of dreadnoughts as spearheads for assault operations requires different considerations, as the chassis' relatively slow movement speed compared to jump pack-equipped assault squads or bike-mounted forces creates coordination challenges. The Blood Angels address this through their Furioso pattern dreadnoughts, which are specifically configured for close assault with enhanced close combat weapons and stripped of long-range armaments that would be wasted in melee. These dreadnoughts advance alongside Death Company squads, their rage-driven pilots matching the fury of the Black Rage-afflicted warriors they accompany. The Furioso's blood talons, with their multiple rending blades, can shred through enemy infantry formations in seconds, creating breaches that assault squads exploit to penetrate deeper into enemy positions. The Space Wolves employ their dreadnoughts in assault roles differently, integrating them with Grey Hunter packs and Blood Claw squads in combined arms attacks that leverage each unit's strengths. The dreadnoughts advance at a measured pace, providing covering fire as the infantry moves forward, then joining the melee once contact is made with enemy positions. The Wolf Guard who command these operations understand that the dreadnoughts' value lies not in matching the speed of younger warriors, but in providing an unstoppable core around which the assault can organize. Enemy forces that concentrate on stopping the advancing infantry expose themselves to the dreadnoughts' weapons, while those that focus fire on the armored chassis allow the Space Wolves' infantry to close unmolested. The tactical flexibility provided by dreadnought weapon loadouts allows commanders to configure these assets for specific mission parameters, though the process of changing armaments requires significant time and the expertise of the chapter's tech marines. A dreadnought equipped with twin las cannons and a missile launcher serves as a dedicated anti-armor platform, capable of engaging enemy vehicles at ranges where return fire poses minimal threat. This configuration proves invaluable when facing mechanized forces, or when the chapter needs to establish fire superiority against enemy armor without committing more vulnerable anti-tank assets. The las cannons can disable or destroy enemy tanks with single shots, while the missile launcher provides flexibility to engage either additional armor with crack missiles or suppress infantry with frag warheads. The assault cannon and heavy flamer combination creates a configuration optimized for urban warfare and close quarters engagements, where the dreadnought will face massed infantry in confined spaces. The assault cannon's high rate of fire allows it to sweep through enemy formations, the mass reactive shells detonating among clustered troops to create casualties that break enemy cohesion. The heavy flamer provides area denial, its streams of burning promethium clearing rooms, trenches, and defensive positions of enemy infantry who cannot withstand the flames. This loadout proves particularly effective during boarding actions aboard enemy vessels, or when clearing hive city sectors, where the close confines negate the advantage of long-range weapons. The multi-melta and close combat weapon pairing creates a breacher configuration designed to destroy fortifications and create entry points through which assault forces can advance. The multi-melta's ability to cut through reinforced walls and blast doors makes it invaluable during siege operations, while the close combat weapon allows the dreadnought to engage any enemies that attempt to prevent the breach. Chapters that frequently conduct boarding actions or assault fortified positions maintain several dreadnoughts in this configuration, understanding that the ability to create breaches on demand provides tactical options that would otherwise require specialized equipment or lengthy preparation. The plasma cannon configuration represents a high-risk, high-reward option that trades reliability for devastating firepower against both infantry and armor targets. The superheated plasma bolts can vaporize infantry squads and melt through vehicle armor with equal effectiveness, making plasma-armed dreadnoughts valuable assets when facing mixed enemy forces, or when the tactical situation remains fluid enough that the commander cannot predict whether anti-infantry or anti-armor capabilities will be more critical. The risk of plasma weapon overheating concerns tech marines less on dreadnought chassis than on infantry-portable weapons, as the Dreadnought's power supply and cooling systems can handle the thermal load more effectively, though catastrophic failures remain possible during extended engagements. Drop pod insertion represents the most dramatic method of deploying Dreadnoughts, allowing them to enter battle directly from orbit and immediately engage priority targets. The drop pod's armored shell protects the Dreadnought during atmospheric entry, the retro thrusters firing at the last moment to slow the descent enough that the impact does not damage the chassis. The drop pod's petals blow open upon landing, and the Dreadnought strides out into battle, often finding itself in the midst of enemy formations whose positions were identified from orbital reconnaissance. This deployment method proves particularly effective when the chapter needs to eliminate specific targets, such as enemy command posts or heavy weapons emplacements, as the Dreadnought can engage these threats immediately upon landing, while enemy forces are still reacting to the sudden appearance of Space Marine forces in their midst. The Ultramarines have developed detailed tactical protocols for drop pod Dreadnought deployment, with specific procedures for different battlefield scenarios codified in their combat doctrine. When deploying against fortified positions, they target the drop pods to land behind enemy lines, the Dreadnoughts emerging to attack fortifications from the rear where armor is typically weakest. Against mobile enemy forces, the drop pods land to block retreat routes, the Dreadnoughts serving as anvils against which advancing Space Marine forces can drive the enemy. The Ultramarines' Tech Marines maintain dedicated drop pods for their Dreadnoughts, these specialized variants reinforced to handle the additional weight and configured with restraint systems designed specifically for securing the massive chassis during the violent descent. Thunderhawk Transport provides a more controlled deployment method, allowing the Dreadnought to arrive at the battlefield as part of a coordinated insertion rather than the scattered pattern that drop pod assaults create. The Thunderhawk's cargo bay can accommodate a single Dreadnought along with a squad of infantry, the gunship's heavy weapons providing fire support during the approach before deploying its cargo at the designated landing zone. This method allows commanders greater flexibility in timing the Dreadnought's arrival, as the Thunderhawk can orbit the battlefield until the tactical situation develops to the point where the Dreadnought's intervention will have maximum effect. The Dark Angels employ this method extensively, their Thunderhawks delivering Dreadnoughts to specific positions identified through careful reconnaissance and tactical analysis. Teleportarium deployment represents the most technologically demanding insertion method, requiring both a properly equipped strike cruiser or battle barge in orbit and Dreadnought chassis fitted with teleport homers. The process involves disassembling the Dreadnought at the molecular level, transmitting the pattern through the warp, and reassembling it at the target location. The risks inherent in this process make it suitable only for the most critical situations, as teleportation failures can result in the Dreadnought materializing inside solid objects, scattered across a wide area, or lost in the warp entirely. The Space Wolves rarely use this method due to their distrust of such technology, while the Dark Angels and their successors employ it more frequently, their Tech Marines having maintained the knowledge required to perform these operations with acceptable risk levels. Boarding actions aboard enemy vessels or space hulks represent scenarios where Dreadnought deployment requires careful consideration of the environment's constraints. The confined corridors and compartments of spacecraft limit the Dreadnought's mobility and restrict fields of fire, while the risk of hull breaches makes heavy weapons use potentially catastrophic. Despite these limitations, Dreadnoughts prove valuable in boarding operations due to their ability to withstand enemy fire in narrow corridors where Space Marines in power armor would be vulnerable to concentrated fire. The Dreadnought advances through the vessel's passages, its bulk blocking return fire and allowing infantry to advance behind it, while its weapons clear defenders from compartments and junctions. The Blood Angels' experience during the cleansing of the Space Hulk sin of damnation demonstrated both the effectiveness and the risks of Dreadnought employment in such environments. The Terminators who formed the primary assault force found themselves facing Genestealer infestations in numbers that threatened to overwhelm even their heavy armor and storm bolters. The decision to deploy dreadnoughts via teleportation into critical junctions provided the firepower needed to break genestealer concentrations, the assault cannons, and heavy flamers clearing the Xenos organisms from compartments where they had established defensive positions. However, the loss of Brother Raphael, a dreadnought whose teleportation placed him in a compartment that collapsed under his weight, highlighted the dangers inherent in such operations. Strategic strikes against high-value targets represent another deployment scenario where dreadnoughts provide capabilities that other Space Marine assets cannot match. When the objective requires destroying a specific installation or eliminating a particular enemy commander, the dreadnought's combination of heavy armor and firepower allows it to advance through defenses that would stop lighter forces. The Raven Guard employ this tactic despite their general preference for stealth and speed, recognizing that some targets require brute force rather than subtlety. Their dreadnoughts deploy after reconnaissance forces have identified the target and mapped enemy defenses, the ancient warriors advancing along routes cleared by scout squads, while assault marines and vanguard veterans create diversions to draw enemy attention away from the dreadnought's approach. The Siege of Terra provided numerous examples of dreadnought effectiveness across the full spectrum of deployment scenarios, from defensive anchor points on the Imperial Palace walls to spearhead assaults against traitor positions. The Imperial Fists deployed their dreadnoughts along the Eternity Wall, positioning them at critical junctures where the wall's structure provided firing positions overlooking the approaches. These dreadnoughts held their positions through weeks of continuous assault, their weapons destroying traitor armor and suppressing infantry attacks while their armor absorbed fire that would have killed dozens of battle brothers. The Blood Angels dreadnoughts participated in counterattacks against traitor breaches, their fury and close combat capabilities proving decisive in ejecting enemy forces that had penetrated the outer defenses. The Third War for Armageddon demonstrated how dreadnought deployment doctrine had evolved across the 10 millennia since the heresy, with Space Marine commanders employing these assets with greater sophistication and better understanding of their capabilities and limitations. The Black Templars dreadnoughts fought throughout the Hive cities, their heavy armor and firepower proving essential in the close quarters fighting that characterized much of the campaign. The urban environment created situations where the dreadnought's slow movement speed mattered less than their ability to survive in kill zones where lighter forces would be destroyed, their advance through contested sectors providing the momentum needed to drive Orc forces back from critical infrastructure. The Salamander's deployment of their dreadnoughts during the defense of Hive Hades illustrated the importance of proper support and coordination when employing these assets. The dreadnoughts advanced alongside tactical squads and devastator units, the combined force providing mutual support that maximized each element's effectiveness. The dreadnoughts drew enemy fire and engaged Orc armor, while the infantry suppressed Orc infantry and protected the dreadnoughts from close assault by hordes of boys that might have overwhelmed even the armored chassis through sheer numbers. The Salamander's Tech Marines maintained forward repair stations, where damaged dreadnoughts could receive emergency maintenance without requiring full withdrawal from the combat zone, keeping these valuable assets in action throughout the extended campaign. The effectiveness of dreadnoughts in combat stems not just from their weapons and armor, but from the experience and tactical acumen of the warriors within. A dreadnought with centuries of combat experience processes battlefield information differently than younger Space Marines, recognizing patterns and anticipating enemy actions based on situations they have encountered dozens or hundreds of times before. This experience allows them to identify enemy weaknesses and exploit tactical opportunities that less experienced warriors might miss, their counsel during combat operations proving as valuable as their firepower. Company captains who fight alongside venerable dreadnoughts learn to listen to their observations and recommendations, understanding that these ancient warriors have forgotten more about warfare than most Space Marines will ever learn. The progressive deterioration of consciousness within Dreadnought sarcophagi, a occurs through mechanisms that even the most learned apothecaries and techmarines struggle to fully understand or prevent. Each cycle of awakening and return to stasis inflicts damage on the neural pathways that maintain memory and personality, the transition between states creating stress that accumulates over centuries into permanent cognitive degradation. The entombed warrior's brain, despite the Space Marine's enhanced biology and the life support systems designed to preserve it, was never meant to endure the repeated trauma of consciousness being shut down and restarted across spans of time that dwarf normal human lifespans. The first few awakenings typically proceed without noticeable issues, the warrior emerging from stasis with his faculties intact and his memories clear. After decades or centuries of this cycle, subtle changes begin to manifest. The earliest signs appear as difficulty retrieving specific memories, particularly those from before internment. The Dreadnought might struggle to recall the face of a battle brother he fought alongside for decades, or find that events he remembers clearly have become jumbled in sequence, battles from different campaigns merging into confused composites where details from one conflict intrude into memories of another. These lapses initially seem minor, easily dismissed as normal memory degradation that any warrior might experience after sufficient time has passed. The chaplains who monitor the Dreadnought's mental states recognize these signs for what they truly represent, the beginning of an irreversible process that will eventually consume the warrior's entire personality. The rate of deterioration varies between individuals, some Dreadnoughts maintaining clarity for millennia, while others decline noticeably after only a few centuries, but the ultimate trajectory remains consistent across all cases. The isolation inherent in Dreadnought existence accelerates this cognitive decay in ways that would not occur if the warrior remained continuously conscious. During stasis, the brain maintains minimal activity, just enough to prevent complete death, but not enough to maintain the neural connections that encode memory and personality. Each period of suspended animation allows these connections to weaken, synapses degrading without the constant reinforcement that active thought provides. When the Dreadnought awakens, his mind must rebuild pathways that have atrophied during sleep, a process that becomes less complete with each cycle. Memories that were once vivid become vague impressions. Emotional connections to past events fade into abstract knowledge that something happened without the accompanying feelings that gave those events meaning. The warrior remembers participating in a particular campaign, but can no longer recall why it mattered or what he felt during the fighting. The temporal disorientation that accompanies each awakening compounds these problems, as the Dreadnought must constantly reorient himself to a present that has moved forward while he remained frozen. A warrior who sleeps for a century awakens to find that the young scouts he knew have become veteran sergeants or died in battles he never witnessed. The chapter's organization has shifted, new companies formed or old ones reorganized in response to losses and recruitment. The enemies the chapter fights might have changed entirely, old foes defeated or driven away, while new threats emerge from unexpected quarters. Each awakening requires the Dreadnought to absorb these changes and integrate them into his understanding of the current situation, a cognitive load that strains minds already damaged by repeated stasis cycles. Some warriors handle these transitions better than others, their mental flexibility allowing them to adapt to change and maintain their effectiveness despite the confusion. Others become increasingly rigid, their minds clinging to familiar patterns and resisting information that contradicts their expectations. The most ancient Dreadnoughts, those who have served for 5,000 years or more, display cognitive patterns that diverge significantly from normal Space Marine psychology. Their speech becomes increasingly formal and archaic, using terminology and grammatical structures that fell out of common use millennia ago. They reference events and individuals from ages past as though discussing recent occurrences, their damaged temporal sense making it difficult for them to distinguish between memories from different eras. Some develop fixations on particular battles or enemies, their consciousness returning repeatedly to these events regardless of the current tactical situation. A Dreadnought who fought against Eldar raiders during the Great Crusade might interpret every combat situation through that lens, seeing Eldar tactics in enemy actions, even when facing orcs or Tyranids, whose methods bear no resemblance to Eldari warfare. The chapter's reclusiarchs and librarians work to slow this deterioration through various interventions during the Dreadnoughts' brief periods of consciousness. They engage the ancient warriors in conversation, asking them to recount their memories in detail, forcing the damaged minds to actively access and articulate their experiences rather than allowing those memories to fade through disuse. They provide information about current events in structured formats that help the Dreadnoughts maintain their grasp on the present, connecting new information to existing knowledge frameworks in ways that facilitate comprehension and retention. The librarians sometimes employ psychic techniques to reinforce failing neural pathways, their powers allowing them to literally strengthen the synaptic connections that encode critical memories and personality traits. These interventions can delay the inevitable decline, but cannot prevent it, the fundamental limitations of biological tissue and the cumulative damage from repeated stasis cycles, eventually overwhelming any attempts at preservation. The final fate awaiting every Dreadnought falls into one of three categories, each representing a different form of ending for warriors who have already died once. The most common conclusion comes through catastrophic destruction in battle, the chassis suffering damage so severe that even the advanced life support systems cannot maintain the warrior's biological functions. A direct hit from a las cannon or melta-weapon that penetrates the sarcophagus, an explosion that tears the chassis apart and exposes the warrior within to the environment, or accumulated damage from sustained fire that overwhelms the armor's protection and compromises critical systems. These deaths, while tragic, carry a certain honor within Space Marine culture. The warrior falls in combat serving the Emperor and his chapter, his sacrifice meaningful, and his death witnessed by battle brothers who will remember and honor it. The gene seed, if recoverable, returns to the chapter's stocks for implantation in new recruits, maintaining the biological continuity that connects all Space Marines across generations. The recovery and treatment of destroyed Dreadnought chassis after battle follows protocols that reflect both practical necessity and spiritual significance. The Tech Marines prioritize retrieving the sarcophagus, understanding that even if the warrior within has died, the life support systems and neural interface components represent irreplaceable technology that can be salvaged for future use. The body of the fallen Space Marine receives the same rights as any battle brother, his gene seed harvested if possible, and his remains prepared for whatever funeral traditions the chapter observes. The chassis itself, if sufficiently intact, returns to the forge for assessment and potential repair. Dreadnought armor can withstand tremendous damage and still be restored to functionality, the modular construction allowing Tech Marines to replace destroyed components and rebuild damaged sections. A chassis that has housed multiple warriors over its operational lifetime might continue serving for millennia after its current occupant falls, each new internment adding to the machine spirit's accumulated experience and character. The second possible fate involves the warrior's consciousness degrading to the point where continued service becomes impossible, his mind so damaged by millennia of stasis cycles and the trauma of repeated awakenings that he can no longer function effectively in combat. This decline manifests in various ways depending on the individual and the specific nature of his cognitive damage. Some Dreadnoughts become catatonic, their consciousness retreating so deeply that they no longer respond to external stimuli or commands from their battle brothers. Others develop delusions so severe that they cannot distinguish reality from hallucination, their damaged minds generating false sensory inputs that override actual battlefield conditions. The most dangerous cases involve Dreadnoughts who become actively psychotic, their deteriorated consciousness producing paranoid beliefs that everyone around them represents threats to be eliminated. These warriors might open fire on their own battle brothers, convinced they face enemy infiltrators, or charge friendly positions believing they assault enemy fortifications. The chapter faces a terrible decision when a Dreadnought reaches this state of irreversible mental collapse. The warrior within has served faithfully for centuries or millennia, his contributions to the chapter's victories beyond measure, his sacrifice in accepting entombment deserving of eternal gratitude. Yet allowing him to continue in his current condition serves neither the warrior's dignity nor the chapter's needs. A catatonic dreadnought occupies resources and space while providing no combat capability. A delusional dreadnought might be deployed only to malfunction at critical moments, his damaged perception causing him to engage wrong targets or ignore actual threats. A psychotic dreadnought represents an active danger to his own forces, his weapons capable of inflicting casualties on battle brothers who trust him as an honored ancient. The chapter master, in consultation with the Master of Sanctity and the Master of the Forge, must determine whether the warrior has reached the point where mercy demands ending his existence, rather than allowing him to continue in a state that dishonors everything he once represented. The actual termination of a dreadnought whose mind has failed represents one of the most solemn and painful ceremonies any chapter performs. The decision is never made lightly or quickly, the chapter's leadership exhausting every possible alternative before concluding that death offers the only appropriate resolution. The Techmarines first attempt to repair or compensate for the cognitive damage, adjusting neural interface settings, modifying life support chemical balances, and employing every technical intervention their knowledge encompasses. The apothecaries examine the warrior's remaining biological systems, searching for treatable medical conditions that might be causing or contributing to the mental deterioration. The librarians probe the warrior's mind psychically, attempting to reinforce failing neural structures or identify specific memories and personality fragments that might be preserved. Only after these efforts have been exhausted and proven insufficient does the chapter acknowledge that the warrior's service must end. The ceremony itself takes place in the chapter's primary chapel, or the Hall of Remembrance, with the chapter master and as many battle brothers as can be assembled present to witness and honor the fallen ancient. The dreadnought is positioned at the center of the gathering, his chassis maintained in full ceremonial decoration despite the damaged mind within. The Master of Sanctity recites the warrior's deeds, a litany that might take hours to complete for dreadnoughts who have served across millennia, ensuring that every significant battle and achievement is acknowledged before the assembled chapter. The warrior's original name is spoken, along with all titles and honors he accumulated during his service, reminding everyone present of who he was before injury and time reduced him to his current state. The Master of the Forge then approaches, accompanied by the Techmarines who have maintained the dreadnought throughout his service, and performs the final shutdown sequence that will end the warrior's biological functions. The process is designed to be as peaceful as possible, the life support systems gradually reducing their activity rather than shutting down abruptly, allowing the warrior's body to fail naturally rather than experiencing the shock of sudden termination. The chaplains maintain vigil throughout, offering prayers for the warrior's soul and invoking the Emperor's mercy for a servant who has given everything in his service. The entire chapter remains present until the Dreadnought systems register complete cessation of biological activity. No battle brother leaving before the ancient warrior has passed beyond all suffering. The body is then removed from the sarcophagus with the same care that would be given to any fallen space marine, prepared for whatever funeral rites the chapter observes, and laid to rest with full honors. The chassis, now empty, is cleansed and consecrated before being returned to storage, ready to receive a new warrior should the chapter suffer casualties that create another candidate for entombment. The third possible fate, and the rarest, involves the dreadnought being retired from active service and placed on permanent display as a chapter relic. This honor is reserved for the most ancient and historically significant dreadnoughts, warriors whose service spans millennia and whose mere existence represents an irreplaceable link to the chapter's past. The decision to retire a dreadnought rather than continuing to deploy him in combat reflects the chapter's judgment that his historical value now exceeds his military utility, that preserving him for future generations matters more than employing him in current battles. This typically occurs when the warrior's age and the cumulative damage to his chassis make continued combat deployment increasingly risky. when each battle brings a significant chance that the Ancient will be destroyed and his knowledge lost forever. The Blood Angels maintain several such dreadnoughts in their fortress monastery on Baal, ancient warriors who fought during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, now standing in positions of honor, where younger battle brothers can see them and understand the depth of their chapter's history. These dreadnoughts are awakened only on the rarest occasions, during chapter ceremonies of the highest significance, or when the Blood Angels face threats so severe that even the risk to these irreplaceable warriors becomes acceptable compared to the potential consequences of defeat. The Dark Angels similarly preserve their most ancient dreadnoughts, though the secretive nature of the chapter means that even the existence of some of these warriors remains known only to the inner circle, their knowledge of the fallen and the circumstances of Caliban's destruction too dangerous to risk in routine combat operations. The creation of new dreadnoughts continues in the era Indomitus, despite the technological stagnation that has characterized the Imperium for millennia, driven by the constant attrition that Space Marine chapters suffer and the need to preserve experienced warriors whenever possible. The return of Robute Guilliman and the introduction of Primaris Space Marines has complicated this process in ways that chapter tech marines and apothecaries are still working to fully understand. The Primaris Marines, larger and more heavily augmented than their firstborn brothers, require correspondingly larger dreadnought chassis to accommodate their enhanced physiology. The Redemptor pattern represents the Adeptus Mechanicus' solution to this requirement, a new design that incorporates technologies recovered from Archmagos Belisarius Call's research while maintaining compatibility with existing chapter infrastructure and doctrine. The Redemptor's introduction has created tensions within some chapters, particularly those with strong traditions regarding dreadnought deployment and maintenance. The chassis' increased power and capabilities make it attractive from a purely military perspective, its heavier weapons and thicker armor providing combat effectiveness that exceeds standard Castroferum patterns. However, the accelerated degradation that Redemptor pilots experience, their consciousness burning out in centuries rather than millennia due to the neural load required to control the larger, more complex machine, conflicts with the traditional view of dreadnought service as a form of immortality. Chapters must now choose between immediate combat effectiveness and long-term preservation of their warriors' experience and knowledge, a calculation that different chapters resolve in different ways based on their specific circumstances and philosophical traditions. The integration of Primaris Marines into existing chapter structures has forced many organizations to confront questions about tradition and adaptation that they might have preferred to avoid. Chapters that have maintained their dreadnought deployment doctrines unchanged for thousands of years must now decide whether to modify these practices to accommodate Redemptor patterns or insist that Primaris Marines who suffer catastrophic injuries be interred in traditional Castroferum chassis despite the size mismatch. Some chapters have embraced the Redemptor enthusiastically, viewing it as a necessary evolution that allows them to preserve Primaris warriors who would otherwise be lost. Others resist its adoption, arguing that the accelerated degradation makes it unsuitable for warriors who should serve for millennia, and that accepting this compromise represents a step toward the gradual erosion of standards that has weakened the Imperium across 10,000 years. The symbolic significance of dreadnoughts within Imperial culture extends far beyond their immediate military value, these walking sarcophagi representing concepts and ideals that resonate throughout the Imperium's hierarchical and deeply traditional society. The Dreadnought embodies the principle that service to the Emperor transcends individual existence, that duty continues regardless of physical limitations or personal cost. This message carries particular weight in an Imperium where the vast majority of citizens live short, brutal lives in service to a state that views them as expendable resources. The image of the Space Marine who continues fighting millennia after his body should have failed provides a powerful narrative that reinforces the Imperium's demands for absolute dedication from its subjects. If even the Emperor's finest warriors accept eternal imprisonment in service to humanity, how can any lesser citizen complain about the sacrifices demanded of them? The Dreadnought also represents continuity with the Imperium's mythologized past, a physical link to the age when the Emperor walked among his armies and the Great Crusade united humanity under one banner. The oldest Dreadnoughts remember this era personally, their testimony providing validation for the Imperium's current form, even as it diverges dramatically from what the Emperor originally intended. When the ecclesiarchy preaches that the Emperor is a god deserving worship, the fact that Dreadnoughts who knew him personally do not contradict this claim lends authority to the theological position. The reality that these ancient warriors might disagree with current imperial doctrine, but lack the platform or inclination to voice such disagreements publicly gets conveniently ignored, their silence interpreted as assent to whatever narrative serves the Imperium's current political needs. The enduring legacy of the Dreadnought as a concept within Warhammer 40,000's grimdark setting lies in how completely it embodies the Imperium's fundamental character. A civilization that will sacrifice anything and anyone in pursuit of survival, that transforms even death into another form of service, that preserves its warriors not out of compassion, but because their experience and capabilities remain useful. The Space Marine who accepts internment in a Dreadnought chassis does not do so believing he will be honored and cherished, but understanding that he will be used until his mind finally breaks or his chassis is destroyed in battle. The chapter maintains him not because they love him, but because he remains an effective weapon. The Imperium celebrates him not because it values his sacrifice, but because his example encourages others to accept their own exploitation without complaint. Yet within this darkness, the Dreadnoughts themselves maintain a dignity that the system exploiting them cannot entirely corrupt. They continue fighting not because they lack the awareness to understand their situation, but because they genuinely believe in protecting humanity from the hostile galaxy surrounding it. They endure isolation, pain, and the gradual dissolution of their consciousness, because the alternative means abandoning the Imperium to threats that would destroy it. Their sacrifice is real and meaningful, even if the Imperium's gratitude is hollow and self-serving. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Dreadnoughts stand as monuments to the terrible price that survival demands and the warriors who pay it willingly despite knowing the cost. They are the Imperium's honored dead who refuse to die, the ancients who remember when humanity dreamed of something better, and the eternal guardians who will fight until their minds finally fail or the galaxy's countless enemies finally destroy them. In this, they embody both the Imperium's greatest strength and its deepest tragedy, the willingness to sacrifice everything for survival, even the humanity of those who do the sacrificing.